Snow had teeth tonight. It bit through Ada Wrenfall's mittens and worried at the seams of her cloak, finding every place wool thinned and breath escaped. The wind came in hard, sideways punches, turning the world into a white wall that swallowed trees whole. Somewhere behind her, the last lantern of Brindlehook village was only a dull ember in the storm, and ahead was nothing but the Evergloam's black trunks and the shrieking sky. Ada bent her head and kept walking anyway. Her father had sent her out before dusk to gather kindling from the low copse, the safer edge where the branches grew thin and the snow lay shallow. An armful, Wylam had said, voice gentle but tired. Just enough to see us through the night, Ada. The last of the split logs are wet. An armful had become a burden, and a burden had become a promise. Ada's arms ached with it now, the bundle hugged tight to her chest as if the sticks could be warmed by her stubbornness. The rope had bitten into her palms hours ago. She couldn't feel it anymore. The storm wasn't supposed to come. The clouds had been heavy, yes, and the cold had pressed low on the roofs. But the wind had risen with sudden fury and dragged snow down out of a sky that seemed determined to bury everything that moved. Ada paused behind the half-shelter of an alder and squinted into the blur. Her lashes were crusted with ice. The path she'd followed was gone, erased so cleanly it might never have existed. For a moment, fear slid coldly under her ribs, clean and sharp as a knife. Don't panic, she told herself. Panicking makes you careless. Careless gets you dead. She turned slowly, trying to find the landmarks she knew, the split boulder like a broken tooth, the leaning pine that had survived 3 storms too many, the ditch where meltwater pooled in spring. All she saw was white motion, black flashes of trunks, and the wind snapping at her cloak like an animal trying to pull her down. She should have stayed closer. She should have turned back sooner. A gust slammed into her side, and her boot skidded on something slick beneath the snow. Ada stumbled, the bundle of kindling shifting in her arms. She caught herself before she fell, but the shift was enough to tell her the ground wasn't level. It sloped, gently at first, then more steeply. Her stomach tightened. The Evergloam's edge didn't slope like that. Ada adjusted her grip, took one careful step, then another. The storm muffled everything, even her own breath sounded far away. She couldn't hear her heartbeat, but she could feel it, heavy, stubborn thuds. She counted her steps without meaning to, a small tether to sanity. At step 12, the trees thinned. Not in the way they did when you reached a clearing, where branches opened and the wind found you like a fist. This thinning felt, deliberate, as if the forest itself had stepped back. Ada stopped. Something dark loomed ahead, cutting into the white like a cliff. Stone. Her first thought was of an old outcropping, one of the buried bones of the hills. But the shape was wrong. Straight lines. Angles. A vertical face that didn't belong to nature. Ada crept forward until the storm spat less snow into her eyes, until the wind broke against the thing in front of her and hissed around its edges. It was a wall. Not the low stacked stone of a field boundary, nor the half-crumbled remains of a shepherd's pen. This wall was tall enough that her lantern, an oil pot she'd tucked under her cloak, wrapped in cloth, couldn't throw light over it. Dark blocks fitted together with a craftsman's care, their surfaces slick with ice. Here and there, carvings had been worn down by age, but some still held their shape, thorny vines looping into circles, and between them, sharp little stars like frost crystals. Ada's breath caught. She had grown up on border tales. Everyone in Brindlehook had. Stories were currency in winter when food was thin and the nights were long. The Evergloam was full of warnings: don't whistle after sunset, don't accept gifts you didn't ask for, don't speak your full name to strangers in the woods. And above all, don't go looking for the old places. Ada should have turned then. But the wind howled behind her, and the cold was a hand tightening around her throat. Her fingers were numb stumps. Her legs had started to tremble from exhaustion, that subtle weakening that meant she was spending more heat than she could afford. Shelter, she thought. Just until the storm eases. I'll leave at first light. Along the wall, half buried in drifted snow, something arched upward, an opening. A gate. The gate stood open. Ada didn't like that. Open gates in a storm felt like a trap with its mouth smiling. But the snow had piled against the hinges, and the ironwork was coated in rime, delicate and pale. If this was a trap, it had been waiting a long time. She stepped through. The air changed on the other side. The wind still pressed and muttered, but it was quieter, caught by the wall's bulk. Snow fell more gently here, drifting down in soft sheets rather than lashing sideways. Ada tilted her lantern so the flame wouldn't choke. Light spilled onto a courtyard swallowed by winter. At its far end rose the shape she'd mistaken for cliff, a castle, black against the storm, its towers sharp as broken spears. It looked too large to be real, too intact to be abandoned. Ice webbed across its high windows. The main doors were set deep in an archway framed by carvings like frozen vines. Ada's steps left dark ovals in the snow. The sound of them, soft crunches, seemed obscene in the hush, as if she were walking through someone else's dream. When she reached the doors, she hesitated, then lifted her hand and knocked. The sound was dull, swallowed by thick wood. She knocked again, harder, and listened. Nothing. Ada pressed her palm to the door. Cold seeped into her skin. She felt the faint vibration of the storm on the other side, a reminder of what waited if she turned away. If no one answered, she could still wedge herself under the arch for a time, pray the wind didn't shift. She tried the iron ring. The door opened. Just enough to spill warmth across her face. Ada froze, half in relief, half in alarm. Warmth didn't belong in a place that looked as dead as this. Warmth meant fire. Fire meant someone was here. She pushed the door open wider, the wood complaining in a long groan, and slipped inside. The smell hit her first, hearth smoke, old stone, and something faintly floral beneath it, like dried petals crushed in a book. Her lungs ached with the sudden change from biting air to interior heat. She swallowed, blinking fast as her eyes adjusted. A vast hall stretched ahead, lined with pillars. Shadows pooled between them. The ceiling arched high overhead, lost in darkness. Frost lay on the edges of things, on tapestries, on the corners of steps, but not everywhere. The place was not wholly frozen. It was as if winter had tried to take it and been resisted in patches. A fire burned in a hearth at the hall's far end. The flame was low but steady, orange tongues licking at blackened logs. Ada stood with her back to the door, her bundle of kindling still clutched in her arms, and listened again. She heard nothing. No footfalls, no voices, no crackle of movement beyond the fire's soft sigh. She should call out, she thought. Announce herself. That was what decent people did. But border tales flickered in her mind. Don't speak in strange halls unless you mean what you say. Ada took a step forward. Hello. Her voice came out thin. Is anyone here? Silence answered then, from somewhere deeper in the castle, a sound like stone shifting. Ada's pulse jumped. She lifted her lantern higher, the flame trembling. Something moved between the pillars. At first she thought it was a shadow. Then it stepped into the firelight, and her breath caught so hard it hurt. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, his shoulders broad enough to fill the arch behind him. Horns curved from his brow, dark and ridged. His face was half animal, half something else, a muzzle softened by the shape of human cheekbones, eyes set forward and keen. Fur, dark as wet earth, lay thick over his neck and arms, but his hands were long-fingered, almost elegant, with claws that caught the firelight. Ada didn't move. The bundle of sticks slid in her arms as her grip weakened. Her mind scrambled for a prayer and found none. The creature stopped as if he'd expected her to run. He held his hands slightly away from his sides, palms turned outward in a gesture that might have been meant to show he carried no weapon. His voice, when it came, was rough, like he hadn't used it in a long while. You're freezing, he said. The words were so ordinary, so startlingly human, that Ada blinked. Her tongue stuck. I'm lost. His gaze flicked to the snow crusting her cloak, to the ice on her lashes, to the way her knees trembled. Something tightened around his eyes, not cruelty but worry. You shouldn't be here, he said, and his gaze darted briefly toward the door, as if checking whether it was properly closed. The forest. The forest is trying to kill me, Ada said before she could stop herself. Her voice sharpened with the truth of it, with the fear she'd been holding down. I knocked. The door opened. He stared at the door as if it had betrayed him. It shouldn't, he muttered. Ada hugged her bundle tighter. If you want me gone, say so. But I can't go back out there tonight. A pause stretched. The fire snapped softly, and the sound was loud in the stillness. At last, the beast nodded once, a small movement that looked like a concession wrestled from pride. Come closer to the fire, he said. Slowly. Ada obeyed, because her body was already near its limit and because there was something in his tone, firm but not threatening, that made her believe moving too quickly might startle him as much as it would endanger her. She crossed the hall, each step cautious. The warmth of the hearth reached her in waves. When she got close enough, the beast turned slightly, giving her space, keeping a careful distance as if he feared his own size. There's food, he said, gesturing with one clawed hand toward a side table Ada hadn't noticed before. Bread, hard cheese, a covered crock that smelled faintly of stew. Ada's throat tightened again, this time with gratitude so fierce it almost embarrassed her. Thank you, she managed. He didn't respond to the thanks. His eyes stayed on her hands. You're carrying wood, he said, as if the fact puzzled him. It's kindling, Ada said. For my father. I was supposed to be home hours ago. Something softened in his face at the mention of her father, like a distant memory tugged at him. He moved away from the hearth toward a door set in the wall. Eat, he said over his shoulder. And warm your hands. I'll bring you blankets. Ada stared after him. His steps made no sound on the stone. That, too, felt wrong. When he disappeared, Ada let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her fingers were shaking as she set her bundle on the floor beside the hearth. The sticks were rimed with snow, dripping onto the stone. She held her hands out toward the fire and winced as sensation returned in prickling stabs. It hurt, but it was a good hurt, proof she still had blood moving in her veins. Her eyes drifted, despite herself, over the hall. The tapestries along the walls showed scenes half obscured by frost, white deer with antlers like branches, a river made of glass, a throne wreathed in thorny vines. The faces in the weaving were too fine, too sharp-boned, their eyes too bright. Faye, her mind whispered. The old stories. Ada swallowed and forced herself to look away. She went to the table, lifted the lid of the crock. Stew thick with root vegetables and herbs she couldn't name sent up a savory steam. She ate with her fingers because there was no spoon and because hunger was louder than manners. By the time the beast returned, she had finished half the bread and was no longer shaking. He carried a stack of blankets that looked heavy enough to weigh down a grown man, yet he held them easily. He dropped them on a bench near the hearth with a thump. There's a room near here, he said. You'll sleep there. The door locks from the inside. Ada's eyebrows rose. From the inside. He met her gaze. In the firelight his eyes were an odd color like green glass touched by frost. So you'll feel safe, he said, then hesitated as if the word embarrassed him. And so I won't disturb you. A flush crept up Ada's neck. I didn't think you would. He looked away sharply. You don't know what I am. I know you can talk, Ada said, and immediately wished she'd chosen gentler words. And you fed me. That counts for something. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. Stay out of the east wing, he said. And do not go into the chapel. The chapel, Ada repeated, startled by the specificity. His gaze snapped back to her. Promise. The word landed heavy. Ada felt it like a weight in the air, as if the hall itself leaned closer to listen. Her skin prickled. Border tales. Words that mattered. I won't go into the east wing, she said carefully. And I won't go into the chapel. The tension in him eased by a fraction, like a knot loosening. Good, he said. Ada gathered the blankets against her chest and stood. My name is Ada, she added, then stopped, heart giving an odd lurch. Had she been foolish to offer it? She hadn't said her full name, at least. Just Ada. A small thing. A safe thing. The beast stared at her as if he didn't know what to do with the gift of a name. After a moment he said, Serric. Nothing else. No title, no family line. Just a single name offered like a stone placed on a grave. Ada nodded. Serric. He led her not down a grand staircase but through a side passage lit by wall sconces that burned with pale blue flames. The light made the stones look like the inside of an iceberg. Ada's footsteps echoed, Serric's did not. The room he gave her was plain in comparison to the vast hall, a narrow bed, a small hearth already laid, a washbasin with water that wasn't frozen. Frost traced the window edges, but the air was habitable. Serric paused at the threshold. "Sleep," he said. "When the storm passes, you can leave." Ada's chest tightened at the word leave. Relief and uncertainty tangled together. "I will," she said. "At first light." He nodded once, then turned away as if the act of being near her cost him something. Ada closed the door and slid the bolt. The solid click calmed her. She laid the blankets on the bed and sat for a moment, letting exhaustion seep through her bones now that she was safe enough to feel it. Her thoughts tried to race. A castle in the Evergloam. A talking beast. Warmth in a place winter should have conquered. The way Serric had made her promise, as if promises mattered more here. Ada rubbed her hands together and stared into the small hearth. The blue flames in the corridor had not flickered like ordinary fire. They had been too steady, too clean. Faye. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But she was also alive, and her father would want her alive more than he would want an armful of kindling. Ada stood, pulled off her boots, and wrapped herself in blankets. She lay on the bed fully clothed, the fabric rough beneath her cheek. Her body sank into warmth like a stone into water. She meant to stay awake. She meant to listen for danger. But sleep took her anyway, swift and heavy, as if the castle itself exhaled and drew her under. Sometime later, she couldn't have said how long. Ada woke with a start. At first she thought the storm had returned. Wind pressed at the window, rattling it in its frame. Snow hissed against the glass. But underneath the sound was something else, a low, rhythmic thrum like distant chanting. Ada sat up, heart hammering. The sound wasn't outside. It was inside the castle, pulsing through stone. She shoved the blankets aside and stood, swaying. The room was dim, the hearth had burned down to coals. The air was colder than before. She listened. The thrum came again, faint but insistent, like a drumbeat buried under thick cloth. It seemed to come from the direction of the corridor, toward the east. Toward the chapel. Ada's stomach tightened. She had promised. But the sound had a wrongness to it, like something waking that shouldn't. What if Serric is hurt? She thought suddenly. What if the castle is collapsing? What if this is why he didn't want me to go there, because it's dangerous? Her promise tugged at her like a hand. The memory of the hall listening, weighing her words, made her skin prickle again. Ada swallowed hard, then reached for her boots. "I'm not going into the chapel," she whispered to herself, as if the stones might hear and mark the distinction. "I'm only going to look." She opened the door. The corridor's blue sconces burned low, their flames shivering. The air smelled sharper now, like metal cold enough to sting. Ada pulled her cloak around her shoulders and crept forward, each step careful. The thrum grew louder. It was not chanting. It was a kind of humming, a note held too long. At the end of the corridor, a stairwell curved downward. Frost crept along its edges like lace. Ada descended, one hand on the wall, feeling the chill seep into her palm. At the bottom was another hall, narrower, older. The stones here were carved with the same thornvine patterns she'd seen on the outer wall. The air thickened with that strange pressure, as if the castle's silence had weight. Ada followed the sound until she reached a doorway half concealed by a hanging tapestry stiff with frost. She pushed the tapestry aside. The doorway was open. Beyond it lay a chamber whose ceiling disappeared into shadow. The thrum was stronger here, vibrating in Ada's teeth. Pale light seeped from within, not firelight but something colder. Ada stepped to the threshold and stopped, breath catching. It was a chapel. The word fell into her mind with certainty. The shape of it, an aisle, rows of stone benches, the suggestion of an altar at the far end, was unmistakable. She should turn away. She should go back, bolt her door, and pretend she'd never heard anything. She should remember Serric's eyes and the way he'd said promise like it was a blade. Ada's foot hovered, then retreated half a step. And then the thrum shifted. It dipped, like a voice faltering, and in that falter Ada heard something else, a soft, pained sound, as if someone had breathed a name and couldn't finish it. Her heart lurched. "Serric," she whispered. No answer came, but the air in the chapel seemed to lean toward her, cold and intent. The pale light brightened in a pulse, and for a moment Ada saw the altar clearly at the far end, stone carved with interlocking circles, thorn vines, and sharp little stars. A shallow silver groove ran around its edge like a ring waiting for a finger. Ada's skin prickled as if she'd walked too close to a fire, though the air was freezing. The storm outside howled again, and the sound shoved fear through her resolve. "Just look," she told herself. "Don't cross the threshold. Don't go in." But the pale light flickered, and in that flicker the chapel's shadows shifted, revealing a glint, something sharp on the floor near the altar, like a thorn or needle. Ada's breath fogged. She stared. A small step would let her see better. A single step. Not into the chapel, just closer to the edge. Her promise pulled. Her curiosity pulled harder. Ada stepped over the threshold. The air snapped. Not in sound, but in feeling, as if an invisible line had been crossed and the world had noticed. The thrum surged, full and clear, and the carvings on the altar flared with cold light. Ada froze, eyes wide. The silver groove around the altar brightened. The thorn patterns seemed to twist, not moving like living vines but rearranging in the way a thought rearranges itself when it finds a new shape. Ada took one involuntary step forward, drawn by the light the way moths are drawn by flame. She reached out, not to touch, but to steady herself against the altar's edge. Her finger met something hidden in the carving, a small barb, sharp as spite. Pain pricked through her numbness. Ada jerked her hand back with a gasp. A bead of blood welled, bright and startling against her pale skin. It fell. One drop, then another, splashing into the silver groove. The light flared so fiercely Ada had to squeeze her eyes shut. The thrum became a chime, deep, resonant, as if the castle's bones had been struck like a bell. Ada stumbled backward, heart battering her ribs. "What did I?" The chapel answered with silence, but not the empty silence of abandoned places. This silence was expectant. The silver groove drank her blood and gleamed brighter. The carvings around it began to glow in sequences, like words lighting one after another. Ada's throat went dry. "This isn't a chapel," she thought wildly. This is a. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Real footsteps, heavy and fast. Ada spun, the lantern swinging in her hand, and saw Serric at the doorway, framed by blue flame and shadow. His eyes burned brighter than the sconces, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression held something close to panic. "No," he said, voice breaking on the word. "No, Ada, don't." The chime rolled through the stone again, deeper, as if answering him. Serric's gaze locked on Ada's bleeding finger, then on the altar's silver ring of light. His shoulders sagged, not with relief, but with dread. "You stepped inside," he whispered, and the way he said it sounded like a verdict. "You crossed the line." Ada backed away until her shoulders hit cold stone. "I didn't mean to," she said, breath coming fast. "I heard something, I thought." The light from the altar rose, not upward like flame but outward like mist. It crawled over the chapel floor toward Ada in thin, shining threads, seeking her as if it recognized her. Ada's heart pounded so hard she thought she might be sick. "Serric," she said, voice trembling. "What is happening?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the glowing groove, his jaw tight as if he were biting back words that wanted to cut. Then he looked at her, really looked, and Ada saw something roar in him, something that had nothing to do with teeth or claws. "Fear. It's an old rite," he said hoarsely. "A crown bond." The light touched Ada's boot and curled around it like frost forming. Ada swallowed. "A marriage rite?" Serric flinched, just slightly, as if the truth hurt. "Yes," he said. "And you've just woken it." Serric moved first, and it was not the movement of a predator but of a man trying to catch a falling cup before it shattered. He crossed the chapel in 3 long strides and caught Ada's wrist, not hard, not enough to bruise, but enough to stop her from flinching away again. His palm was warm, startlingly so against the chapel's cold. He turned her hand, eyes narrowing on the small wound. The light threaded around her fingers as if it had been waiting for them. Ada, he said, voice low, strained, do not speak anything you don't mean in here. I what? Her breath fogged. The silver glow licked at her skin, and a strange pressure gathered in her ears, like the moment before thunder. He brought her hand closer to the altar, not touching the stone, only hovering above it. The rite listens for word, he said. It already has writ these carvings. It has witness this place, this keep. Your blood, his throat bobbed. Your blood made the land notice you. Ada stared at the glowing groove. It looked like a ring of moonlight trapped in metal. So if I say, I don't want this. Serric's grip tightened a fraction. Then it will take your words as law. It will bind your refusal as tightly as it would bind your consent. Ada's stomach dropped. That's unfair, he finished for her, bitterly. Yes. The light climbed her wrist, cool as river water. Ada felt it beneath her skin, not painful, not pleasant, simply present, as if a new sense had been switched on and she could suddenly feel the shape of the chapel in her bones. Serric released her wrist and stepped back, as if he feared his touch might be interpreted by the rite. You've triggered the bond, he said. It will complete itself unless. Unless what? He hesitated long enough that Ada knew the answer would not sit easy. Unless it breaks. And that would. His gaze met hers, and for the first time the firelight from earlier felt like a different life. It could harm you, he said. It could kill you. It could lock the keep into a deeper winter than you've ever seen. Ada swallowed hard. Her finger still bled slowly, each drop glowing before it vanished into the groove. Then stop it, she whispered. I can't, Serric said, and the word sounded like a confession he hated. Not alone. The chapel chimed again. This time the sound was closer, more intimate, as if it had moved from the stones into Ada's ribs. The carvings flared in a pattern that looked like interwoven circles tightening, pulling. Ada's knees went weak. Serric's hands lifted, hovering, then dropped to his sides, clenched. Come, he said, voice rough. Out of here. Ada moved without argument. The moment she crossed the threshold again, the pressure eased, though the cold light remained in the chapel behind them like a watchful eye. Serric walked fast, leading her back through the narrow corridor and up the stairs. His silence was heavy. Ada's thoughts were louder than the storm. When they reached the grand hall, the hearthfire still burned. The castle's vastness suddenly felt like a throat she'd stepped into. Serric halted near the fire and turned to her as if he needed the heat between them to speak. The rite doesn't mean. He stopped. His muzzle creased, the fur around his brow shifting with emotion. It doesn't mean what humans always mean by it. Ada's cheeks warmed despite the cold in her veins. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. It means I'm bound to you. It means the land will recognize you as consort, Serric said. If it completes. It means you will have rights and obligations within this keep and within my kingdom, what's left of it. Your kingdom, Ada repeated, disbelief edging her tone. This castle is yours. Serric's gaze flicked upward, toward the shadowed ceiling as if he could see through stone into memory. It was, he said quietly. Before winter took it. Ada looked again at the frost-stiff tapestries, at the pillars that seemed carved to resemble tree trunks, at the thornvine patterns hiding in every edge. And you're, what, exactly? Pain flashed across his eyes. Cursed, he said. That much is true. Ada didn't like the way he avoided her question. But she remembered his warning, do not speak what you don't mean. Words here were knives and chains. So instead she said, carefully, I want to understand what's happening to me. Serric's shoulders loosened a fraction, as if relief had found a crack in his dread. Then you must listen, he said. And you must be careful. He motioned for her to sit on the bench near the hearth. Ada did. The warmth seeped into her again, but it didn't chase away the chill the chapel had laid inside her. The rite is called a crown bond, Serric said. It was made for kings and queens, rulers whose authority is tied to land. It binds not only two people, but a realm's recognition. It makes the crown shared. Ada's throat tightened. I didn't agree to that. No, Serric's voice sharpened, and she realized his anger was not aimed at her. You didn't. That altar should have remained dormant unless invoked with intention. It should not have been able to catch a stray drop of blood and decide. He cut himself off, jaw flexing. Ada wondered what he'd almost said, decide to take. Decide to claim. Ada pressed her thumb over the prick on her finger. The wound had already begun to close, unnaturally fast, the skin knitting in a way that made her unease deepen. So why did it wake? Serric stared into the fire. Because it recognized a key, he said. A human witness. Fresh blood. A living will. Ada blinked. Human witness? The last consort was Fae, Serric said. Long before the curse. The rite was locked. I have tried to wake it for years. His voice dropped to something raw. It wouldn't answer me. Ada's stomach turned. So the moment I arrived. It answered, he said. Yes. A bitter laugh rose in Ada's throat and died there. Lucky me. Serric flinched as if she'd struck him. I didn't ask for this, he said quickly, then slower, as if forcing each word through a narrow gate. And I will not take from you what you did not choose. If there is a way to nullify it without harm, I will find it. Ada studied him. His beast face made emotion harder to read, but not impossible. The tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself slightly angled away, as though he feared his size might threaten her. The carefulness. The restraint. She believed him. That frightened her too, because believing someone gave them weight in your life. Can I leave? Ada asked. Serric's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them, they were bright in the firelight. I don't know, he admitted. Not yet. Ada's mouth went dry. Not yet, she repeated, tasting the helplessness in the phrase. The storm outside screamed like a living thing, and Ada's fear shifted shape. The forest had been a danger she could fight with boots and stubbornness. This was older. This listened. Serric stood abruptly. You should sleep, he said, too sharply. We will speak more in the morning. Ada rose too, anger flaring, not at him, exactly, but at everything. No, she said, and the word echoed strangely in the hall. Serric's gaze snapped to her, and Ada felt the hall's attention like a subtle pressure. She swallowed and corrected herself, slower. I can't sleep while I'm bound to a stranger by accident, and you're telling me I might not be able to go home. Serric's claws flexed. Then he turned his palms outward, the same gesture he'd used before. Then ask what you need, he said, voice rough but controlled. I will answer as fully as I can without. His gaze darted briefly toward the chapel corridor. Without feeding the rite more word than necessary. Ada drew a breath. She chose each question like she might choose where to step on thin ice. What happens next? Serric's shoulders lowered slightly. The bond will try to complete, he said. It will press us toward recognition. The keep will react. React how? It may wake what has been sleeping, he said. It may call the court. Ada frowned. Court. Serric looked at her as if measuring how much truth she could bear at once. This place was not always empty, he said quietly. There were people. A realm. Winter came, and time stopped. Ada's gaze slid to the tapestries again. The woven faces seemed to watch. And the curse, Ada said. You said you're cursed. This bond breaks it. Serric's eyes darkened. It is part of the key, he said. The bond shares sovereignty. The curse stole mine. If the bond completes, it forces the land to recognize me again. He swallowed. It may restore me. Ada stared at him. The thought of this beast becoming something else, something more beautiful, perhaps, or more terrifying, made her stomach clench. If it restores you, she said carefully, what happens to me? Serric's voice softened. You will be tied to this realm, he said. And you will change. Ada's hand drifted to her chest. She could still feel that cool thread of light under her skin. Change how? He hesitated. Fae blood and human blood do not mix easily, he said. But a crown bond makes them learn each other. Ada's pulse hammered. Will I stop being human? Serric met her gaze, and something like regret flickered there. Not at once, he said. And not wholly, perhaps. But you will not remain untouched. Ada's anger dimmed, replaced by a hollow fear. Her father's face rose in her mind, weathered, kind, lined by work and worry. She thought of his hands splitting logs, his quiet pride when she kept the accounts straight and the pantry full. She thought of him waiting by the hearth, listening for her steps. "I need to tell my father," Ada said, and her voice wavered despite her effort. "He'll think I'm dead." Serric's jaw tightened. "If you step beyond the boundary now, you may not be able to return," he said. "And if the bond breaks?" Ada's nails dug into her palm. "So I'm trapped?" Serric's gaze dropped. "Yes," he said softly. "For now." The honesty hit harder than any excuse. Ada pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. Serric turned away as if he couldn't stand to watch her take it in. "I will have food brought," he said. "Brought?" Ada repeated sharply. Serric froze. For a heartbeat, the hall held its breath. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, Ada heard something that was not the wind and not the fire, the soft scuff of a foot on stone far down the corridor. Serric's head lifted. His ears, yes, actual ears, furred and pointed, twitched. Ada's skin prickled. "Serric," she whispered. "You said you were alone." His eyes turned toward the shadowed passageways. "I was," he said. "Until now." The scuff came again. Then another. Multiple. Ada took a half-step closer to Serric without thinking. He didn't look at her, but his body shifted slightly, placing himself between her and the hall's deeper darkness. The air changed. It thickened, charged. The hearth flame flared brighter as if fed by unseen draft. From the far corridor, pale light seeped, blue-white, like the sconces, but stronger. It washed over stone in a slow wave. And then figures emerged. They moved like people waking from a long, stiff sleep, stiff at first, then smoother. Their clothes were elegant in a way Ada had never seen, in brindlehook, layered fabrics that caught the light like frost on silk. Their faces were too fine, too symmetrical, with eyes that gleamed like polished stone. Some wore circlets of ice glass. Some carried no visible weapons yet walked with the confidence of those who had never needed them. Fae. They entered the hall in a spreading curve, not rushing, not hesitating, as if they were following choreography written centuries ago. When they saw Serric, a murmur ran through them like wind through reeds. Their gazes snapped to him, then to Ada, and the murmur changed, sharp with surprise. A woman stepped forward, older than the others perhaps, her hair braided tight and silvered as if by frost. Her expression was severe enough to cut. She looked at Serric first and bowed, precise and deep. "My king," she said. The others followed, bows and kneels rippling across the hall like a tide. Ada's mouth went dry. Serric's shoulders tensed. "Lady Sivra," he said, voice controlled. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded braced. The severe woman lifted her head. Her eyes, ice-gray, slid to Ada. They took Ada in from boots to hair, not crudely but thoroughly, the way Ada might inspect a log before splitting it. "And who," Lady Sivra asked, "stands beside you unannounced?" Serric didn't answer immediately. Ada felt the air's pressure again, that subtle listening. Words mattered. Titles mattered. If Serric named her wrongly, would the hall accept it as law? Before Serric could speak, the hearth did something impossible. The flame dipped low, then surged, and the fire's light cast a shadow on the stone floor that wasn't Serric's beast shape at all. For a moment, Ada saw it as clearly as she saw her own hands, the outline of a tall man with a crown-like sweep of hair, shoulders squared, posture regal. The shadow's hand rested where Ada stood. A collective inhale went through the court. Several fae flinched as if burned. Lady Sivra's face went still. Then, slowly, she lowered herself again, deeper than before, and this time her bow was angled toward Ada. "My queen," she said, and the words struck the stone like a seal. Ada's heart lurched. "I'm not," she started, then bit the rest back so hard she tasted blood. Not explicit word. Not in a hall that listened. Serric's head turned slightly, his gaze catching Ada's. Something like apology flickered there, and beneath it, a bleak acceptance. "The keep has spoken," Lady Sivra continued, voice crisp. "If it recognizes her, we do as well." Ada swallowed, feeling a cold thread tighten inside her. The bond, she thought. It's already pulling the world into agreement. One of the Fae, an older man with ink-dark hair and fingers stained faintly blue, pushed through the kneeling line with visible unease. He wore no finery beyond a simple sash bearing a symbol like a closed eye. "Your Majesty," he said to Serric, then his gaze flicked to Ada and he bowed awkwardly, as if unused to it. "The registry," he stopped, glancing at Lady Sivra. "The registry is changing." Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed. "Ollind," she said, as if the name were both recognition and warning. The man archivist Ollind Mar, Ada realized, filing the name away, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "The writ is rewriting itself," he said softly. "The Crown Bond has begun to inscribe." Ada's stomach dipped. "Inscribe what?" she asked before she could stop herself. Ollind's eyes widened slightly, surprised, perhaps, that she spoke at all. His gaze flicked to Serric, seeking permission. Serric nodded once, curt. Ollind cleared his throat. "The royal record," he said. "The vow books. The contracts the realm recognizes. When sovereignty shifts, the writ corrects names, titles, lines of duty. It is rare. It hasn't happened in living memory." Ada's fingers curled into the edge of her cloak. "So the castle is writing me into your laws." Serric's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said, and the word sounded like a door closing. Lady Sivra straightened. "Then we must proceed correctly," she said. "A misspoken vow at the start of a bond can fracture it. And a fracture now," her gaze cut briefly toward Serric's beast form, "would be catastrophic." Ada's fear sharpened at the certainty in her tone. "So what do you do?" Ada asked. Lady Sivra studied her again, and Ada felt like a nail being tested for weakness. "We stabilize," Lady Sivra said. "We contain. We ensure the Queen does not wander into contracts she cannot read." Ada's cheeks warmed with indignation. "I can read." Lady Sivra's mouth did not move, but something like faint amusement glinted in her eyes. "Can you read Fae writ?" she asked. Ada opened her mouth, then closed it. "No." Lady Sivra turned to Serric. "Your Majesty," she said, "you must bring her to the Hall of Registry at dawn. The writ must be witnessed properly." Serric's shoulders stiffened. "No one will corner her," he said, voice low. "Not with language. Not with ceremony. Not while she's..." Lady Sivra's gaze hardened. "While she's human," she supplied. "Or while she is untrained." Serric's claws flexed. "While she is new," he said, and the care in the choice of word made Ada's throat tighten. Lady Sivra inclined her head as if accepting a concession. "Then I will train her," she said. "If the Queen is to survive court, she must learn to step where the floor is solid." Ada did not like the idea of being trained like a hound. But she liked even less the idea of dying because she didn't know which words were safe. Serric looked at Ada. The question in his eyes was unspoken, and Ada understood it. "Will you allow this?" Ada drew a slow breath. "I will learn," she said, choosing the words like stones placed carefully on a path. "But I won't be treated like an object." Lady Sivra's gaze sharpened, then, unexpectedly, she nodded once. "Good," she said. "Objects do not survive either." The court began to move again, rising from kneels, shifting into smaller clusters that whispered behind hands. Ada caught fragments: human, altar, land's witness, restoration. Serric gestured, and the murmur dimmed as if obeying a rule older than sound. "You will have quarters prepared for her near the hearthwing," he said. "Close." Lady Sivra bowed. "As you command." A broad-shouldered man in dark leathers stepped forward. His face was weathered, his eyes clear, his stance like a wall. He bowed to Serric with blunt efficiency. "Marshal Fenner Rusk," he said. "The ward guard is assembling." We felt the surge. Serric's gaze sharpened. "Any breach?" he asked. Fenner's eyes flicked briefly to Ada, then away, as if making a point about discretion. "Not yet," he said. "But the keep's wards are unpredictable. Like a sleepwalker waking." Serric exhaled. "Double the watch," he said. "No one approaches her without being announced." Ada's chest tightened at the pronoun. "Ha." Like a precious thing. Like a threat. Lady Sivra stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Your Majesty," she said, There is also Chancellor Mavrin. Serric's muzzle tightened in something that looked like a grimace. Of course there is. Ada blinked. Chancellor? Lady Sivra glanced at Ada as if deciding whether the explanation was worth the breath. Mavrin Skell, she said. Administrator of the realm's operations. Keeper of the treasury, the border wards, the civil registers, those that remained active through winter. Ada's stomach clenched. Those that remained active. So not everything had been sleeping. Serric's voice cooled. He will not be the first to speak to her, he said. Lady Sivra's eyes flicked, sharp with something Ada couldn't name. He will object, she warned. He can object into the snow, Serric said flatly. Then, as if he realized the sharpness might be heard as a vow, he added more carefully, he can raise concerns through proper channels. Lady Sivra bowed again, and Ada thought she saw a tiny crack of satisfaction in her severity. The court dispersed at Serric's command like mist drawn back into corners, though not entirely. Ada felt their eyes on her as they went, weighing her, measuring what kind of queen a woodcutter's daughter might become. Serric turned to Ada when the hall was mostly empty. The exhaustion in his posture startled her. He looked like someone who had been holding up a ceiling alone and had just realized how heavy it truly was. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Ada's throat tightened. For what? She asked, though she knew. For the trap you walked into, he said. For the eyes on you. For the way this place will try to make you a story instead of a person. Ada stared at him. Under the fur and horns and sharp teeth, he sounded like a man who understood being made into something he didn't choose. She swallowed. Then help me stay a person, she said. Serric's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I will, he said, and the words felt dangerously close to a vow. He seemed to sense it too, because he added softly, as best I can. Ada's new quarters were near the hearthwing, as Lady Sivra had said, but they were no simple guest room. The chamber had been prepared with a speed that felt unnatural, fresh linens, a larger bed, a hearth already roaring. A basin of warm water steamed gently, and a set of clothes lay folded on a chair, a dress of soft grey wool with embroidery at the cuffs that looked like frost flowers. Ada stared at the clothes, then at Lady Sivra, who stood in the doorway like a carved statue. I didn't ask for that, Ada said. Lady Sivra's expression didn't change. You did not ask to bleed on an altar either, she said. But the realm does not pause for your preferences. You will wear what does not insult the court. Ada bristled. In my village, wool is wool. In this court, writ is writ, Lady Sivra said. Dress is language. Ada wanted to argue, but Serric's earlier warning echoed in her mind, words bind. If dress was language here, then perhaps it could bind too. Ada forced her voice to calm. Then teach me, she said. Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed, as if measuring sincerity. After a beat, she stepped inside and closed the door behind her with a soft click. I will begin with what not to say, Lady Sivra said. You will not thank anyone for obedience. That implies they had a choice to refuse you. You will not say you promise unless you understand the price of promising. You will not say I swear at all. Ada nodded slowly, absorbing it like a list of tools and their uses. Lady Sivra began to pace the room, her words crisp as snapped twigs. A vow is not merely a sentiment. It is a structure. It has word, writ, witness. The witness can be the land, the keep, another fey, or, she paused, her gaze slicing to Ada's chest, as if she could see the bond there. A bond. Ada's skin prickled. So the castle was a witness to my promise not to go into the chapel. Lady Sivra's mouth tightened. Yes, she said. And you broke it. Heat flooded Ada's face. I didn't know, she said, then corrected quickly, I didn't understand. Lady Sivra's gaze did not soften. Ignorance does not spare you here, she said. But intention may. Ada's hands clenched. What does that mean? It means, Lady Sivra said, that you will learn to speak with intention before your mouth runs ahead of your mind. Ada bit back a retort that would have been satisfying and dangerous. She nodded instead. Lady Sivra moved to the folded dress and lifted it, shaking it once as if to test its honesty. Put this on, she said. Then you will eat. Then you will sleep. At dawn, we go to the registry. Ada swallowed. And my father? Lady Sivera's gaze paused on her for the first time in something like consideration. Your father lives across a border that is not stable, she said. If the keep opens the wrong way, it may open into winter itself. Ada's stomach twisted. So he'll never know. He may, Lady Sivera said abruptly. If the king deems it safe to send a message. Ada heard the small mercy beneath the severity and hated that she needed it. All right, she said. Lady Sivera watched her for a heartbeat longer, then turned away, giving Ada privacy not out of kindness, perhaps, but because even in a vow-bound court there were lines of propriety. Ada changed into the dress with stiff fingers. The fabric was warm, better made than anything she owned, and the frost flower embroidery at the cuffs caught the hearthlight in a way that made it look alive. She hated that she liked it. When she emerged, Lady Sivera handed her a simple cloak and led her down the corridor to a smaller dining room that still felt like a chapel to Ada. High ceilings, long table, candles that burned with pale blue flame. Serric sat at the far end, posture tense, his beast form looking even larger in the narrow space. He rose when Ada entered, then hesitated, as if unsure whether standing was required or would be interpreted as a vow. Ada's chest tightened. Even manners were a battlefield. She dipped her head slightly instead of curtsying, because she didn't know what a queen was supposed to do to a king she was apparently married to by accident. Serric's gaze warmed in something like gratitude. Food was set before her, stew again, bread, a small dish of berries that tasted like frost and honey. A woman brought it, her dark hair loose, her eyes bright with the kind of alert curiosity Ada recognized in market gossips. She bowed, but her smile was quick and genuine. I'm Nessa Briarweft, she said, then caught herself and cleared her throat as if remembering rules. Mistress of Stitchwards. If your sleeves pinch, tell me. I'll fix them. Lady Sivera's gaze flicked to her like a knife. Names are offered by the court when appropriate, she said. Nessa's smile turned mischievous. Appropriate is such a flexible word, she said lightly, then bowed again and slipped away before Lady Sivera could scold her further. Ada's lips twitched despite herself. Serric watched that tiny reaction with something like relief, as if any sign of Ada remaining herself was a good omen. They ate with Lady Sivera speaking in measured instruction and Serric mostly silent. Ada learned quickly that silence could be safer than speech. But silence also left room for fear to grow. When the meal ended, Lady Sivera dismissed the servants and left Ada with Serric alone at the long table. The blue candles made shadows look too sharp. Serric's gaze stayed on his hands for a moment. You did well, he said finally. Ada's eyebrows rose. By not accidentally swearing myself into servitude. A low sound left Serric half laugh, half pained exhale. Yes, he said. By keeping your sense. Ada folded her hands to hide how they trembled. Tell me the truth, she said softly. Are you relieved this happened? Even a little? Serric's head lifted. His eyes met hers, and Ada felt again the halls listening even here, even now, the keep seemed to care. No, Serric said, and the word came clean as snowmelt. I am relieved by one thing only, that you did not die in the storm. Ada's throat tightened. She had not expected that. Serric's claws scraped faintly on the table's edge. If the bond breaks my curse, he continued, voice quieter, that is a consequence. Not a victory I earned. Ada stared at him. His shame filled the space between them like smoke. You were alone here, Ada said, remembering the emptiness, the vast hall and his careful distance. For how long? Serric's gaze drifted away. Long enough that time stopped feeling like something measured, he said. Long enough that I began talking to the fire just to hear a voice. Ada's chest ached at that, unexpectedly. She looked down at her hands, at the faint line of silver glow that seemed to cling around her finger where the prick had been. And now the court is awake, she said. Yes, Serric said. And now the person who cursed me may be awake too. Ada's skin prickled. You think the one who did it is still here? Serric's eyes darkened. No one knows who cast it, he said. But curses like mine don't hold without maintenance. A theft of sovereignty, his jaw tightened. Doesn't endure on silence alone. Ada's breath caught. So someone has been keeping it in place. Serric nodded once. Ada swallowed hard. And now I've given them a new target. Serric's gaze snapped back to her. You are not bait, he said, voice low. You are, he stopped, as if the next word could become a vow, could lock her into a role he didn't want to force. Ada waited, heart pounding. Serric exhaled slowly. You are under my protection, he said at last, choosing something that sounded official enough to be safe. Ada's lips pressed together. That sounds like a cage, she said quietly. Serric flinched. I know, he said. But it is also the truth. If you walk unguarded in this keep right now, someone will try to make you vanish. Ada's stomach churned. She thought of her father again, and how far away he suddenly felt, as distant as the lantern glow swallowed by the storm. Can you send word to him? She asked. Serric hesitated. At dawn, he said. After the registry. If the writ recognizes you properly, the keep's border may obey a message. Ada nodded, clinging to the thread of possibility. Serric stood. Sleep, he said. Then, more softly, please. Ada's chest tightened at the addition. She wanted to tell him she was afraid. She wanted to tell him she wasn't sure how to be brave in a place where words could become chains. Instead she said, carefully, I will try. In her chamber, sleep came in fragments. Ada drifted, woke, drifted again. Each time she woke, she felt something new, the way the castle hummed faintly beneath her, like a living animal at rest, the way the air tasted different, sharper, sweeter, the way her hearing stretched until she could pick out distant footsteps and the soft hiss of candles burning in other rooms. At one point she sat up, heart racing, because she could swear she'd heard her name whispered, not in a voice, but in the stone. Ada pressed her hand to her chest and felt a faint warmth there, like an ember cupped in the palm. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Bond, she thought. Crown bond. At dawn, though dawn here was more a thinning of darkness than true sunlight, Lady Sivra arrived with a brisk knock and no patience for Ada's bleary stare. Nessa followed behind her, carrying a small bundle of pins and thread. You'll want the collar adjusted, Nessa said. Fey cloth can read your posture. If it thinks you're shrinking, it will make you shrink. Ada blinked, uncertain whether it was jest. The way Nessa's eyes gleamed suggested it might not be. Lady Sivra's gaze could have frozen a river. Stop frightening her, she said. I'm helping, Nessa replied, unbothered, and before Ada could protest she was adjusting the dress at Ada's throat with quick, deft fingers. There, she said. Now you look like you belong to yourself. Ada swallowed. Thank you, she said automatically, then remembered the lesson and hurried to add, for your work. Nessa's smile warmed. That one's safe, she murmured. Lady Sivra ushered Ada into the corridor, and Marshal Fenner fell into step a few paces behind, his presence steady as a shield. Two other guards, quiet, pale-eyed Fey, flanked them at a distance. As they walked, Ada noticed doors she hadn't seen before, carvings that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. The keep was waking, rearranging itself like a person stretching after sleep. They reached a set of double doors carved with the closed-eye symbol Ada had seen on Olin's sash. The doors opened without touch, responding to Lady Sivra's presence like a trained animal. Inside was the Hall of Registry. The air smelled of ink and cold metal. Tall shelves lined the walls, filled not with ordinary books but with bound volumes that seemed to breathe faintly, their covers pulsing with slow, subtle light. In the center stood a long stone table etched with the thornvine patterns, and above it hung a chandelier of ice glass that gave off no flame yet filled the room with pale illumination. Archivist Olind waited beside the table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Serric stood opposite him, posture rigid, eyes fixed on Ada as she entered as if gauging whether she was still whole. Ada's chest tightened at the sight of him. Part of her wanted to run to him like a child to her father. Another part bristled at the idea that she needed anyone. Lady Sivra guided Ada to the table's near edge. Do not touch anything unless instructed, she murmured. Ada nodded. Olind bowed to Serric and then, awkwardly, to Ada. Your Majesties, he said, voice thin. The writ has been active all night. Serric's jaw tightened. Show us, he said. Ollind opened one of the living volumes with reverent care. The pages were not paper but something like pressed frost, thin, translucent. Words were etched into them in a script that made Ada's eyes ache if she stared too long. Still, she could recognize patterns, names, lines, seals. Ollind pointed. "Here," he said, voice shaking. "The Crown Registry." It was blanked during the curse, names struck, titles held in stasis. But now, the letters shifted as Ada watched, like ink swirling into new shapes. A name formed, Serric Vaelthorn, followed by a title Ada could not read but felt in her chest like a heavy bell. Then another line began to inscribe itself beneath. Ada's breath caught as the letters coiled into something that resembled her name. Not Ada Wrenfall. Ada, then a second word that glittered and rearranged as if searching for a fit. Ada's skin prickled. She felt the keep listening again, judging what she would be called. "No," Ada whispered before she could stop herself, then bit her lip hard, cursing her own tongue. The room's air tightened. Serric's gaze snapped to her. "Careful," he murmured, not harshly, but urgently. Ada swallowed. She forced herself to slow down. "I don't want my name changed." The pressure in the room shifted, as if considering the sentence. Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed, but she didn't scold, perhaps because Ada had phrased it as desire rather than vow. Ollind's hands trembled above the page. "The writ will attempt to align," he said. "If the bond wants you recognized, it will seek a true name it can anchor. Human names," he swallowed, "are sometimes insufficient for Fey writ." Ada's stomach turned. "So it will invent something." Serric's voice went low. "It will try," he said. Lady Sivra stepped closer. "This is why you do not resist blindly," she said to Ada. "If you force conflict in the writ, it may fracture. Better to guide it." Ada stared at the shifting letters. "Guide it? Like you might guide a river into a channel before it flooded." "How?" Ada asked, voice tight. Lady Sivra's gaze pinned her. "By choosing," she said. "By offering the writ an intention it can accept." Ada's heart hammered. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way every breath might become part of a structure. Serric stepped closer, and Ada felt his presence like warmth at her side. He didn't touch her, didn't dare, perhaps, but his voice lowered to something meant only for her. "If you offer your name as you mean it," he said, "without swearing it, the writ may take it as truth." Ada swallowed. Her father's face rose again in her mind, and with it the memory of her mother's voice saying Wrenfall like it meant roots and hearth and belonging. She drew a slow breath and spoke, carefully. "My name is Ada Wrenfall," she said. "Not a promise. Not a vow. A statement of self." The hall's air eased, as if satisfied. On the page, the glittering second word shuddered, then softened, the letters aligning more closely with Wrenfall, though the script still shimmered, as if translating the sound into something the writ could hold. Ollind exhaled shakily. "Good," he whispered. Lady Sivra's shoulders lowered a fraction. "Again," she said. "So the witness hears it clearly." Ada looked around, startled. "Witness? The hall? The keep? The land?" She repeated, "Ada Wrenfall." The page brightened. The line beneath Serric's name completed itself, the final seal pressing into the frost page like an invisible stamp. Ada's chest tightened as something inside her clicked into place, not pleasure, not pain, but a shift, as if a door had been properly latched. Serric's breath left him in a quiet sound. His posture eased by a fraction, and for a heartbeat Ada saw something flicker across him, an outline, as in the hearth's shadow, of a man standing straighter, lighter. Then it was gone. Ollind closed the book with trembling care. "The writ recognizes," he said. "The witness has accepted." Ada's knees felt weak. Marshal Fenner stepped closer, not touching her but ready if she swayed. Lady Sivra turned brisk again, as if softness might be mistaken for weakness. "Good," she said. "Now we proceed to the next necessity, learning what this recognition grants and what it demands." Before Ada could ask what demands meant, a new presence slid into the room like a cold draft. A man entered with the smooth confidence of someone who had walked these corridors even when the rest of the keep slept. His clothes were dark and impeccably arranged, his hair pale as ash, his expression composed in a way that felt practiced. His eyes were sharp, and when they landed on Ada, Ada felt as if she'd been weighed and found inconvenient. "Your Majesty," the man said, bowing to Serric with flawless precision. I felt the registry surge. Serric's muzzle tightened. "Chancellor Mavrin," he said. Mavrin Skell lifted his gaze and let it rest on Ada just a heartbeat too long. "And so it's true," he murmured. "A human witness." Ada's spine stiffened. "I'm standing right here," she said, before she could stop herself. Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed like a warning blade, but Mavrin's mouth curved slightly, as if amused by Ada's bluntness. "As are we all," Mavrin said smoothly. "Which makes it a fine time for clarity." His gaze returned to Serric. "A crown bond, Your Majesty," he said. "Forged by accident, I hear. Unwitnessed by proper officiants. Incomplete." Serric's voice cooled. "It is witnessed," he said. "By the land." Mavrin's eyes flicked briefly to the closed registry book. "The land is impressionable," he said. "And the keep has been unstable for years. We should be cautious about trusting its impulses." Ada's stomach tightened. Impulses. He spoke of the keep like a sick animal. Like something that might be put down. Lady Sivra's voice cut in. "The registry has accepted," she said. "That is not impulse. That is law." Mavrin's gaze slid to her with polite disdain. "Law can be forged," he said mildly. Ollind flinched as if struck. Ada watched the archivist's hands tremble. Serric stepped forward a fraction, and the room's temperature seemed to drop. "Choose your words," Serric said, low. Mavrin bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the warning without yielding. "Always," he said. Ada realized with a cold clarity that Mavrin was dangerous not because he was loud, but because he was careful. He would not swing a sword. He would move a sentence. Mavrin turned his attention back to Ada, and his voice softened into something almost kind. "My queen," he said, and the words sounded like honey poured over iron. "This is an immense change. I cannot imagine how frightened you must be. You must allow us to protect you from the court's enthusiasm." Ada's skin prickled. The same word Serric had used, protection, but in Mavrin's mouth it sounded like containment. Ada drew a breath. "I will accept help," she said carefully, "from those who speak plainly." Mavrin's smile did not change, but his eyes sharpened. "Plain speech is a luxury," he said gently. "And luxuries are costly in winter." Serric's claws flexed. "Enough," he said. Mavrin bowed again, all obedience. "As you wish," he said. "Then I will simply make a practical recommendation. Until we determine the curse's origin, the queen should not leave the hearthwing. The keep's wards are unreliable. A human body is fragile." Ada's anger flared. "My body brought your king back to law," she snapped, then immediately hated that she'd said it. "Ha! Brought back law." All words that could snag. The room's air tightened again. Ada felt the bond pulse in her chest like a warning. Serric's gaze flicked to her, steadying. "Ada," he murmured, not a scold, a reminder. Ada forced herself to unclench her jaw. "I'm not glass," she said instead, slower. "And I won't be hidden away like a guilty secret." Mavrin's eyes gleamed. "Of course not," he said. "Merely, safeguarded." Lady Sivra stepped between Ada and Mavrin with a grace that was almost a shove. "The queen will be trained," she said. "And guarded. By the marshal. Under the king's oversight. There will be no private council." Mavrin's expression remained serene. "As you decree," he said, though the words sounded like he was filing them away for later use. He bowed once more, then turned and left the registry hall without haste, as if he had all the time in the world. When he was gone, Ada realized her hands were shaking. Serric looked at Ollind. "What did he mean?" Serric asked quietly. "By law can be forged." Ollind swallowed. "He means," his gaze flicked nervously to Lady Sivra, then back. "He means the writ can be altered if someone has access." Lady Sivra's mouth tightened. "And the Chancellor has access," she said. Ada's stomach dropped. "So he can rewrite anything." "Not anything," Ollind said quickly, as if trying to reassure himself as much as Ada. "There are seals. Witness marks. But, he swallowed. If the seals were compromised before the freeze. Serric's eyes darkened. Then the curse's anchor could be in the registry, he said. Olind nodded, face pale. Yes. Ada felt suddenly cold despite the hall's pale light. The curse wasn't only a spell. It was paperwork, law, language, structures that could be twisted. Lady Sivra turned sharply. We will not discuss this in open halls, she said. The keep listens, and so do those who walk it. Marshal Fenner nodded once. I'll tighten the watch, he said. Serric's gaze returned to Ada. I promised your father a message, he said quietly. Ada's throat tightened. Can we do it now? She asked. Serric hesitated. There is a way, he said. But it requires a small rite. And I need you to trust me. Ada looked at him. Trust. She had nothing else that felt solid. I do, she said, and hoped the keep didn't take it as a vow. Serric led her to a smaller chamber near the registry, an anteroom with a single window of thick, cloudy glass that looked out onto nothing but white. A shallow brazier sat in the center, unlit. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and cold stone. This is a message well, Serric said. It can carry a spoken intent along the border wards. Not far. Not perfectly. But if your father is within Brindlehook's edge, he may hear. Ada's pulse leapt. What do I do? Serric knelt by the brazier and placed a small pinch of something, dried petals, perhaps, into it. Do not promise, he reminded her. Do not swear. Simply speak what is true. Ada swallowed, then nodded. Serric struck a flint. The brazier caught with a pale flame that smelled sweet and sharp. The smoke rose in a thin line, curling toward the window as if drawn by a thread. Serric looked up at Ada. Say his name, he said. Only his. Ada's voice trembled. Wylam, she whispered. The smoke shivered. Now speak, Serric said, as if you are speaking to him across your hearth. Ada closed her eyes. She pictured her father's kitchen, the cracked stone hearth, the kettle that always sang too loudly, the patch in the rug she kept meaning to fix. She pictured his hands, scarred, steady. Father, she said, voice breaking. I'm alive. I'm safe from the storm. I'm away longer than I meant. Please don't go into the Evergloam looking for me. The smoke curled tighter, as if listening. Ada felt the bond pulse once in her chest, warmth, approval, or simply presence. I will come home if I can, Ada added, and the moment the words left her mouth, fear stabbed through her. If I can, was that safer? She hoped so. Serric's eyes were on her, sharp, but he didn't interrupt. He only lifted a hand slightly, palm open, as if guiding the message outward rather than binding it. Ada forced herself to keep going. If anyone comes saying they know where I am, don't trust them. Wait. I love you. The last words fell out before she could stop them, pure and helpless, and Ada squeezed her eyes shut as if bracing for punishment. The smoke rose, then vanished into the window glass as if absorbed by it. The flame in the brazier dimmed. Serric let out a slow breath. It's done, he said softly. Ada opened her eyes, heart still hammering. Will he hear? Serric's gaze held hers. If the border wards are aligned, he said. And if the curse hasn't twisted the path. Ada nodded, clinging to the possibility like a splintered plank in river water. The day that followed was a blur of instruction and watchful eyes. Lady Sivra drilled Ada in court speech until Ada's tongue felt bruised. Do not accept gifts, Lady Sivra snapped, without asking what they cost. Do not say thank you in the wrong way. Do not allow anyone to draw you into a statement that can be witnessed and recorded. Ada learned to answer with questions. She learned to pause before speaking. She learned that I will consider was safer than yes, and that I cannot was safer than no, because no could be taken as refusal and refusal could become structure. Serric appeared and disappeared like a shadow at the edge of her vision. Sometimes he watched from a doorway while Lady Sivra taught. Sometimes he walked beside her in silence, his presence a shield that also felt like distance. Once, in a corridor lined with frost-cold statues, Ada caught him staring at his own reflection in a dark window, his expression so haunted she almost reached for him. But she didn't. Touch, too, might mean something here. And Ada was tired of meaning things she hadn't chosen. By late afternoon, the keep had grown louder. Doors opened that had been sealed. Servants moved in quiet streams. The court's whispers were everywhere, threading through halls like smoke. And under it all, Ada felt the bonds pull, a gentle insistence, like the tug of a thread tied around her wrist, drawing her toward Serric and toward the heart of the realm. That evening, Lady Sivra allowed Ada one small freedom, a walk in the inner courtyard, enclosed by the high wall that sheltered it from the worst of the wind. Marshal Fenner accompanied her, silent as stone. 2 guards followed at a distance. Snow lay pristine, unbroken except for Ada's new footprints. The air was cold but calmer than the forest's fury. Above the wall, the sky was a bruised gray. Ada lifted her face and breathed. The cold tasted clean. For a moment, it felt almost like Brindlehook again, like she could pretend this was just another winter evening and not a life turned upside down. She rounded a corner where a fountain stood frozen into a sculpted spire. The ice was so clear she could see trapped bubbles, suspended mid-rise like halted breaths. Ada stared at it, something aching in her chest. Frozen life. Stopped time. Without thinking, she reached toward the ice. Marshal Fenner's voice cut low. "Don't," he warned. Ada froze with her hand inches from the fountain. "Why?" Fenner's jaw tightened. "Wards," he said. "Old ones." Ada withdrew her hand. "Does everything here want to bite?" she muttered. Fenner's eyes flicked to her. "Only what's been hurt," he said quietly. "And what's been used." Ada's breath caught at the unexpected depth, but before she could respond, a soft voice drifted from the courtyard's shadowed archway. "My queen." Ada turned. A young fey woman stood there, her hair pale as frost and her eyes too bright. In her hands she held a small velvet pouch. Lady Sivra's lessons rang in Ada's head like bells. "Do not accept gifts." Ada kept her expression neutral. "Yes," she said cautiously. The woman bowed. "A token," she said. "To celebrate your recognition. From my house to yours." Marshal Fenner shifted slightly, his presence hardening. "State your name," he said. The woman's smile faltered for a fraction. "Lysen," she said. "Lysen of the Cloudmere line." Ada's pulse picked up. The pouch looked harmless. That was the point, wasn't it? Harmless things were the ones that slipped into your life and changed it. "What does it cost?" Ada asked, forcing the words out with Lady Sivra's crispness. Lysen blinked, then smiled again, brighter. "Only your favor," she said. "A small kindness. A word that you remember my house when the court seeks your ear." Ada's stomach turned. A word. A favor. The structure of a trap. "I cannot accept that," Ada said, careful. "But I thank you for the thought." Lysen's smile tightened. "It is rude," she said softly, "to reject a gift." "It is rude," Ada replied, voice steady, "to offer a gift with a hook." For a heartbeat, Lysen's eyes flashed anger, humiliation, something sharper. Then she bowed again, too deep, too rigid. "As you command," she said. She turned to leave. And as she did, her fingers brushed the pouch drawstring. Something inside it chimed faintly. Ada's bond flared, hot, sudden. She stumbled, clutching her chest as if the air had turned to ice and been shoved into her lungs. Marshal Fenner swore under his breath and stepped in front of her. The guards moved, blades half-drawn. Lysen whirled back, eyes wide with something that looked like triumph disguised as surprise. "My queen," she cried. "What's wrong?" Ada fought for breath. Her vision blurred at the edges. The courtyard's snow seemed too bright, too white, as if it wanted to swallow her. Fenner's voice was like a rope. "Stay back," he snarled at Lysen. Ada's knees buckled. For an instant she expected to hit snow. Instead, arms caught her, strong, warm, familiar in their unfamiliarity. "Serric." He held her with startling gentleness, one arm under her knees, the other bracing her shoulders. His eyes blazed, not with firelight but with something colder and more lethal. "What did you do?" Serric's voice was low, and the courtyard seemed to shrink around it. Lysen's mouth parted. "Nothing," she said quickly. "I only offered." "A trap," Serric said. Ada clutched at Serric's sleeve, fingers numb. The bond in her chest pulsed wildly, like a panicked heartbeat that wasn't hers alone. She could feel Serric's attention narrowing, focusing. His gaze snapped to the velvet pouch that lay on the snow near Lysenne's feet. Serric's voice dropped to something older, heavier. "Marshal," he said, "take that." Fenna moved, swift and wary, and scooped the pouch with the edge of his cloak without letting it touch skin. The moment it lifted, the pressure in Ada's chest eased a fraction, enough that she could draw a shaky breath. Serric's arms tightened around her, not crushing, but anchoring. Ada realized, distantly, that being held by him felt like the only solid thing in a world of shifting rules. Lysenne backed away, palms lifted. "My king," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know it would." "You knew," Serric said softly. The softness was worse than a shout. "Because you chose to bring it where the queen could be witnessed." Ada's breath caught on the word witnessed. The courtyard. The guards. The wall. The keep. Everything watching. Lady Sivra's voice cut in from the archway, sharp as ice. "What is this?" she demanded as she strode into the courtyard, her gaze taking in Ada in Serric's arms, the pouch in Fenna's cloak, Lysenne's pale face. Serric didn't look away from Lysenne. "An attempt," he said, "to test whether the queen can be made to collapse." Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed to slits. "By what mechanism?" Ada forced herself to speak, though her voice shook. "When it chimed," she said, "my chest." She swallowed hard. It felt like the bond was being pulled. Nessa appeared behind Lady Sivra, eyes wide, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Oh," she whispered. "That's a tug chime." Lady Sivra's gaze cut to her. "Explain," she snapped. Nessa stepped forward, her usual humor gone. "It's stitched with a tiny vow," she said. "Not a big one. A nudge. It latches onto a bond and tugs like a child pulling a skirt hem, except if the bond is new, it yanks hard enough to hurt." Ada's hands clenched. "So someone tried to hurt me by pulling on the marriage bond." Lysenne's voice rose. "I didn't." Serric's voice silenced her. "Enough," he said. Marshal Fenna's jaw worked. "It could have ruptured her breathing," he said grimly. "She went down fast." Lady Sivra's face was carved stone. "Who authorized this?" she demanded. Lysenne's eyes darted toward the archway, toward the corridor beyond, toward somewhere Ada could not see. "No one," she said. "It was only a gift." Serric's gaze followed that darting look, and something in him went very still. Ada felt it too, a shift in the air, as if an unseen hand had moved a piece on a board. Someone else was watching. Someone who wanted this to look like a foolish court offering. Someone who wanted Ada weak. Serric looked down at Ada, and for the first time his beast face looked openly furious. "I told them not to approach you," he said, voice low. Not accusing Ada, accusing the world. Ada's breath trembled. She met his gaze and forced her voice to steadiness. "And now you know they will anyway," she said. Serric's eyes narrowed, as if he recognized the steel in her. Lady Sivra stepped closer, her tone clipped. "The queen returns inside," she said. "Now." Ada wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could walk. But her legs still felt like snowmelt, shaky and unreliable. Serric lifted her without effort and carried her toward the keep, his steps heavy enough that Ada heard them this time. As they passed through the archway, Ada looked back. Lysenne stood in the courtyard, pale and trembling, watched by guards and by Lady Sivra's cold stare. But beyond Lysenne, in the shadowed corridor of the keep, Ada thought she saw a flicker of movement, dark fabric, a still figure turning away before she could focus. A presence retreating. Ada's stomach tightened with cold certainty. The culprit wasn't a rumor. He was awake, he was close, and he had just made his first strike. Ada's lungs remembered how to breathe by the time Serric carried her back to the hearthwing, but her body didn't trust the memory. Each inhale felt borrowed. The cold tug inside her chest had eased when the velvet pouch was taken away, yet the bond remained tender, like a bruise you only notice when someone presses it. Serric did not set her down until they were inside her chamber and the door was bolted. Marshal Fenna remained just outside, a steady shadow through the crack beneath the door. Serric lowered Ada onto the edge of her bed as if she might shatter. His hands hovered a heartbeat, then withdrew, and Ada saw the effort in the restraint. Lady Sivra entered behind him, her expression cut from winter stone. Nessa slipped in last, cheeks flushed, her bundle of pins clutched like a weapon. The courtyard is now sealed to unannounced approach, Lady Sivra said briskly. Any fae who tries to offer you anything without a declared ledger of cost will be escorted out. Out where? Ada rasped. Lady Sivra's gaze flicked to her, acknowledging the question without softness. Into a corridor that does not lead back quickly, she said. The keep has ways. Ada's stomach tightened. Ways. Like teeth. Serric's gaze stayed on Ada. Do you feel the bond still pulling? He asked quietly. Ada pressed a hand to her sternum. The ember warmth there pulsed faintly, steady now. It's there, she said. But not yanking. Nessa nodded sharply. Tug chimes are small, usually, she said. Small enough to be laughed off. But on a new crown bond. Her eyes flashed. Cruel. Ada's hands curled into the blanket. So Lysen did it. Lady Sivra's mouth tightened. Lysen was the hand, she said. Not necessarily the mind. Serric's muzzle creased. She glanced toward the corridor, he said. As if taking her cue. Ada remembered the flicker of dark fabric. The way the air had shifted, like a piece moved on a board. Someone wanted witnesses, she said softly. They wanted it seen. Serric's eyes sharpened. Yes, he said. They wanted you to fall in public. Lady Sivra's gaze went distant, calculating. Because a queen who collapses can be called unstable, she said. And instability invites intervention. Ada swallowed. Intervention by whom? Silence tightened. Nessa's eyes darted to Lady Sivra, then to Serric. She didn't say it, but Ada could hear the unspoken name in the shape of their restraint. Chancellor Mavrin. Ada's anger rose hot, then cooled into something sharper. If we're going to survive this, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, I need the truth even when it's ugly. Serric looked at her a long moment, then nodded once. You're right, he said, and the agreement felt like a small bridge laid down between them. Lady Sivra exhaled as if conceding to necessity. The Chancellor maintained functions through the freeze, she said. He knows corridors the rest of us forgot. If the culprit hid within bureaucracy, he would be the first to smell it. Ada's pulse quickened. That doesn't mean he is the culprit. No, Serric said. But it means he is dangerous whether guilty or not. Nessa's mouth tightened. And someone had to commission that tug chime, she added. Stitchwards don't walk into a court seam shop and ask for bondhooks without leaving a trail. Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed. Unless the trail was already there, she said. Unless it was made long ago, stored, and retrieved. Ada's skin prickled. Like the altar, she whispered. Waiting. Serric's gaze dropped briefly to Ada's hands, to the place where her finger had been pricked. The curse was built with patience, he said. This is the same hand. Ada stared at him. Then we find that hand. Serric's shoulders sagged a fraction, like a man relieved not to carry a burden alone. Yes, he said. We do. Lady Sivra straightened. Then we proceed as the court does when truth is contested, she said. We gather witness. We follow writ. We force word into the open. Ada's mouth went dry. And how do I not get trapped while we do that? Lady Sivra's gaze pinned her. You learn to keep your words in your mouth until your mind has walked them through, she said. Then, almost grudgingly, and you learn to use what the bond gives you. Ada blinked. Use it. Nessa stepped closer, eyes bright. You felt the tug, she said. That means you can feel the bond as a thread. If you can feel it, you can brace it. You can anchor yourself. Ada's stomach tightened. With magic. With rite weaving, Nessa corrected gently, as if naming a tool properly mattered. Magic is what people call it when they don't respect the rules. Serric's gaze flicked to Nessa, then to Ada. If you're willing, he said quietly, I can teach you the rules. Enough to keep you safe. Ada thought of the courtyard. Of the breathless collapse. Of her father waiting in Brindlehook, hearing only silence if the message well failed him. of Mavrin's honeyed voice and iron eyes. I'm willing, she said. Lady Sivra nodded once, brisk again, as if agreement allowed her to return to duty. Rest, she said. At first light, we begin in earnest. When the door closed behind them, Ada expected the silence to swallow her again. Instead, Serric remained. He stood near the hearth, hands clasped behind his back as if he didn't know what to do with them. Firelight caught in his fur, turning it copper at the edges. He looked like a creature carved to frighten, yet his posture carried a careful restraint that felt almost human. Ada sat on the bed, her hands still. Are you afraid of me? She asked before she could talk herself out of it. Serric's head lifted. His eyes met hers, and something like surprise moved through his expression. No, he said. Ada swallowed. Then why do you stand like you're afraid to breathe near me? Serric's gaze dropped. Because the bond listens, he said softly. And because I am afraid of taking anything that isn't freely offered. Ada's chest tightened. The admission landed between them like a small truth placed carefully on stone. I don't feel taken, Ada said. Then, because she didn't trust the words, she added, quieter, I feel pulled. Like my life is tied to a post I didn't choose. Serric's jaw flexed. I know, he said. And I hate that the post is me. Ada let out a shaky breath. Do you ever wish the altar hadn't answered? She asked. Even if it means you stay cursed? Serric went still. The fire snapped, loud in the hush. Then he said, very quietly, yes. Ada stared at him. Serric's voice rasped, as if the truth scraped his throat on the way out. Because if I had to choose between my restoration and your freedom, he said, I would choose your freedom. Ada's throat burned. No one in Brindlehook had ever offered her a choice like that. Her father loved her, but love wasn't the same as recognizing agency. This was different. This was a man, beast or king, refusing to use the power fate had handed him. Ada's fingers curled into the blanket. Then we find a way to make it a choice, she whispered. Serric's gaze lifted. What do you mean? I mean, Ada said, heart hammering, I don't know what I'll choose. I'm terrified. But I won't live as someone else's consequence. If I'm here, I want to be here on purpose. Serric's eyes glinted, bright as winter sun. Ada, he murmured, and her name in his mouth sounded like something precious handled carefully. A soft knock came at the door, 3 taps, measured. Marshal Fenner's voice followed, low. Your Majesty. The archivist requests your presence. Immediately. Serric's posture shifted, kingly even in beast form. Stay inside, he told Ada. Ada's jaw tightened. I won't go wandering, she said. But I won't be hidden from what's happening. Serric hesitated, and Ada saw the calculation, safety versus trust. At last he nodded once. Then come, he said. But stay beside me. And speak only when necessary. Ada stood, smoothing her dress with hands that trembled less than before. She followed him into the corridor. Fenner fell in behind them. The keep's blue sconces burned brighter tonight, as if the stone itself watched more keenly. They returned to the Hall of Registry, where Archivist Olland waited with his face pale and his hands stained faintly blue with ink frost. The living volumes on the shelves pulsed softly, like sleeping animals aware of a storm. Olland bowed. Your Majesties, he said, voice tight. The registry has produced an anomaly. Lady Sivra stood near the table already, arms folded, expression severe. Nessa lingered at the doorway like she'd been dragged here by worry and curiosity in equal measure. Serric's eyes narrowed. Show me, he said. Olland opened a volume to a page marked by a thin strip of iceglass, then stepped back as if afraid of what it contained. It appeared after the crown bond inscribed, he said. A correction. Or an objection. Ada leaned forward despite herself. The script shimmered, thorny and precise. She couldn't read the full meaning, but she could feel the intent beneath it, cold, rigid, lawful. Serric's claws dug into the stone table's edge. That is not a correction, he said quietly. That is a claim. Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed. A claim of what? Olland's voice shook. Of legitimacy, he said. Someone's writ asserts that the crown bond is invalid without proper officiants and recorded witnesses. Ada's stomach dropped. Mavrin, she whispered before she could stop herself. The hall's air tightened slightly, as if noting the name. Serric's gaze snapped to Ada. Careful, he murmured. Ada pressed her lips together, furious at herself. Lady Sivra's expression did not change, but her voice sharpened. This language, she said to Ollind, is old. Older than our current court code. Ollind nodded quickly. Yes, he said. It references statutes that predate the freeze by centuries. I did not know they were still active. Serric's muzzle creased. Someone wanted them active, he said. Someone who knew how to keep the old seals warm even while the kingdom slept. Nessa stepped closer, eyes bright. Old seals don't wake without heat, she said. Someone fed it. Ada's chest tightened. So the curse isn't just a spell, she said softly. It's laws. Papers. Old rules. Yes, Serric said. And if those rules are invoked, they can be used to strip you of recognition. Ada felt suddenly cold. And what happens to me if they do? Serric's gaze held hers. The bond could fracture, he said. Or it could cling without protection, twisting you into something half-made. Human enough to suffer, fey enough to be owned by the realm's structures. Ada's vision blurred at the edges. She steadied herself with a hand on the table. The stone felt faintly warm under her palm, as if the keep recognized her touch. Lady Sivra's voice cut through. Then we must locate the anchor, she said. The old statute cannot assert itself unless a witness is bound to it. Ollind swallowed. There is a witness, he said, and his gaze flicked to Ada in apology. It names the altar. Ada's breath caught. The chapel. Serric's shoulders tightened. Of course, he said, bitter. Nessa's brow furrowed. So someone used the chapel as witness for an objection, she said. That means someone went in after the bond woke and fed the writ into it. Ada's skin prickled. And I'm not the only one who bled there, she whispered, sudden certainty twisting in her gut. Serric's eyes darkened. No, he said. You are not. Lady Sivra turned sharply. Then we return to the chapel, she said. Serric's gaze snapped to her. Not with Ada, he said, voice low. Not after what happened. Ada bristled. I'm standing right here, she said again, then forced herself to breathe. And I won't be used, but I won't be blind either. Serric's claws flexed. His gaze stayed on her, conflicted. Then, very quietly, he asked, are you willing to step near it again? Ada's stomach turned, but she met his gaze. If it keeps me alive, she said, and keeps my father from losing me to silence, yes. Serric held her eyes a heartbeat longer, then nodded. Then we do it together, he said. And we do it with rules. They went to the chapel under heavy guard, Fenner and 2 ward guards at the rear, Lady Sivra like a blade at their flank, Ollind clutching a ledger volume, and Nessa tucked close behind Ada as if her presence alone could stitch a tear shut. The corridors leading east felt colder than the rest of the keep. Frost crept in thicker patterns, thorn vines blooming along stone like white scars. Ada felt the bond in her chest tighten as they descended the stairwell, not painful, but alert. At the chapel threshold, Serric halted and looked at Ada. Do not promise, he murmured. Do not refuse. Do not agree. Only observe. If you feel the bond pull, tell me. Ada nodded once. They stepped inside. The air snapped the way it had before, recognizing them. The altar glowed faintly, the silver groove duller than the night Ada bled, but awake. The silence here was not empty. It was listening so hard it felt like pressure on Ada's skin. Ollind moved toward the altar with reluctant reverence, stopping short. He opened the ledger and held it up as if showing it to the chapel itself. Writ, Lady Sivra murmured. Witness. Nessa leaned toward Ada, whispering, stay behind me if you feel lightheaded. Ada almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat. Humor felt dangerous here. Serric stepped closer to the altar, stopping at the silver groove. He did not touch it. His posture was rigid, as if the stone could leap. What was fed into this place? He asked softly, voice careful. The chapel did not answer with words, But Ada felt something stir like a draft moving through a closed room. Ollind flipped pages, searching. His breath came fast. There, he whispered suddenly, and pointed to a line of old script. A statute marker. It shouldn't be here. Lady Sivra leaned in, eyes narrowing. That is not the Crown Bond writ, she said. That is a counter-rite. Ada's chest tightened. Counter-rite. A protest written into law. Serric's claws curled slowly. Who would know how to bind that? He asked. Ollind's voice shook. Someone who had access to the older registry volumes, he said. Someone who could keep their seals warm through winter. Ada's gaze slid, unbidden, to the altar's silver groove. It gleamed faintly, and for a heartbeat she imagined another drop of blood falling there, another person standing where she stood, feeding the stone in secret. Her stomach turned. Then the bond flared. Not a tug like the courtyard, but a sudden heat blooming under her sternum, hot enough to make her gasp. Ada staggered, one hand flying to her chest. Nessa grabbed her elbow. Ada, she hissed. Serric's head snapped toward her. What do you feel? He demanded, voice tight. Ada tried to breathe through the heat. Like a wire tightening, she rasped. Like someone is pulling from the other end. Serric's gaze whipped to the altar. The silver groove brightened. And then, like winter cracking open, the chapel poured cold into the air. A wave of frost surged outward from the altar, racing across the stone floor in branching patterns. Candles along the walls flared blue-white. Ollind stumbled back with a cry. Fenna shoved him away from the altar's path. Serric went rigid. His breath hitched, a harsh sound that didn't belong to him. The fur along his arms bristled. The air around him shimmered, and Ada saw, for a breathless instant, the outline of a different shape trying to force its way through his beast form, taller, sharper, crowned. Serric's knees buckled. Ada's heart lurched. Serric. Lady Sivra's voice sliced through the chaos. Frostback, she snapped. His breaking a vow line. I didn't vow. Serric's voice broke into a snarl, and the chapel's cold seemed to bite deeper. Ollind's eyes were wide with terror. The counter-rite is invoking, he gasped. It's invoking a false witness. Ada's bond flared again, and she understood without knowing how, the chapel was being forced to choose which truth to recognize. Serric's restoration pulled one way. The counter-rite pulled the other. And the strain was tearing him. Serric's claws scraped stone. His breathing turned ragged. Frost crawled up his legs like living ivy. His eyes squeezed shut as if he were trying to hold himself together by sheer will. Ada's body moved before her mind could argue. She stepped toward him. Fenna lunged. No, he barked, reaching for her. Ada shrugged free with more strength than she should have had. The bond burned in her chest, hot and insistent, like it had been waiting for her to act. Serric's head lifted slightly, and his eyes, green glass touched by frost, found hers. Terror flashed there. Not for himself. For you, he rasped. Ada swallowed hard. Then let me choose, she whispered, and for once the words felt like they belonged to her. She did not touch the altar. She did not bleed. She did not speak a vow. She simply placed her hand against Serric's forearm. His fur was warm beneath her palm, but the warmth was fading as the frost climbed. The moment her skin met him, the bond surged like a heartbeat shared. Ada felt a thread snap taut between them, wordless, writless, but real. A connection the chapel could not deny because it was already written in her chest. Serric gasped, a harsh sound. The frost hesitated. Ada closed her eyes and listened not to the chapel's pressure, but to the bond itself. She felt it like a braided cord, 3 strands, word, writ, witness, twisted together. The chapel tried to pull the witness strand away, to make the altar witness the counter-rite instead of the bond. Ada braced. She didn't know spells. She didn't know the old statutes. But she knew what it meant to hold a rope steady while someone else tried to wrench it from your hands. She'd done it with stubborn logs and runaway goats and her father's grief when the pantry was thin. Stay, she whispered, not as a vow, not as an order to Serric, but as an anchor to herself. Stay with me. Stay present. Stay alive. The bond responded. Warmth drained from Ada's fingertips as if the cord drew it out of her blood. Her hand went numb, then colder, as if she'd plunged it into snow. Her breath fogged thickly. She felt the cost, warmth, being taken. But Serric's frost stopped climbing. His breathing eased by a fraction. Lady Sivra's voice went tight with shock. "She's stabilizing the witness," she whispered. Nessa's eyes were wide, shining. "She's bracing the bond," she breathed. Without word. Without writ. Just will. Ollind stared as if watching a legend crawl out of a book. Ada's knees trembled. The cold in her hand spread up her arm, biting deep. Still she held on. Serric's eyes opened fully. For a heartbeat, the beast's face shimmered and Ada saw beneath it the outline of the king, sharp-boned, crowned by hair like dark winter branches, eyes bright as thawing ice. Then the shimmer settled. Serric remained beast, but the collapse stopped. The frost on his legs cracked, tiny fissures opening as if warmth pushed back from within. Serric looked at Ada's hand on his arm. His voice came out rough, broken. "Ada," he whispered, and her name sounded like prayer and warning both. Ada's lips were blue. "I'm okay," she lied, teeth chattering. Serric's claws lifted, hovering near her wrist. He didn't dare grab her, didn't dare make contact without knowing what the chapel would interpret. His gaze flicked to Lady Sivra, furious and helpless. Lady Sivra snapped, "Fenna, get her away before the cost drains her." Fenna moved fast, gripping Ada's other arm and pulling her back. The moment Ada's hand left Serric's fur, the bond in her chest pulsed hard, like protest. Ada stumbled, swaying, cold all the way to her bones now. But Serric stayed upright. The chapel's surge dimmed, as if thwarted. The altar's glow receded, sullen. Ada dragged in a breath that tasted like ice. Her vision wavered. Serric took one step toward her, then another, slow and careful as if each footfall might trigger a ward. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. He only leaned close enough that Ada felt warmth on her cheek. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. Ada's teeth chattered too hard for pride. "I held a rope," she managed. Serric's eyes narrowed with pain and something softer beneath. "No," he said. "You chose." Ada's throat tightened at the word. Choice. It had cost her warmth, it had cost her fear, but it had been hers. Lady Sivra turned sharply to Ollind. "Write it down," she ordered. "Not as vow. As record. The Queen can stabilize the bond without invoking the altar." Ollind fumbled with his ledger, hands shaking. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I." Nessa stepped closer to Ada, pressing a small stitched square into Ada's palm. "Heat stitch," she murmured. "Don't speak. Just hold it." Ada clutched it. A gentle warmth seeped into her skin, not enough to erase the cold, but enough to keep her from shaking apart. Lady Sivra's gaze cut to the altar again. "The counter-rite triggered when the chapel recognized your presence," she said to Serric, voice tight. "Someone primed it. Recently." Serric's muzzle tightened. "Which means," he said slowly, "they know she can stabilize me now." Ada's stomach dropped. "So they'll come harder," she whispered. Serric's eyes held hers. "Yes," he said. They left the chapel fast, not running, but moving with the urgency of people who knew the floor might shift under them. The keep's corridors felt colder now, as if offended by being denied its dramatic fracture. Back in the registry hall, Lady Sivra demanded immediate review of access paths to the chapel and to the older statute volumes. Fenna dispatched guards. Nessa hovered near Ada, fussing at her sleeves and forcing warm tea into her hands without ever asking permission in a way that could become contract. Serric stood near Ada's chair, posture protective without touching. Every time someone approached, his gaze sharpened, and Ada realized the king's gentleness had edges meant to cut threats away. When Ollind returned from a frantic search among the living volumes, his face was grey. "I found something," he whispered. Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed. "Speak." Ollind swallowed. "The counter-rite references a witness contract," he said. "A name-sworn agreement tied to the altar. It names the officiant who can declare a bond valid or invalidate it." Ada's heart hammered. "Officiant," she repeated. "Like a priest." Olin's voice trembled. Not a priest, he said. A chancellor. The room went still. Ada felt the bond pulse, warm and warning. Serric's claws curled slowly. That's impossible, he said, though his tone suggested he no longer believed in impossibility. Olin's eyes darted to Ada, apologetic. The old statute allows an administrative officiant to witness crown bonds during times of crisis, he said. It was meant to prevent succession collapse if the ceremonial court was absent. Lady Sivra's face was carved from ice. And who, she asked softly, is the administrative officiant now? No one answered. They didn't have to. Ada's mouth went dry. Mavrin, she whispered, and this time the name tasted like a shard of glass. Serric's gaze snapped to her, but he didn't scold. He only looked, sick with understanding. Nessa's hands clenched at her sides. Fenna's jaw tightened like a door being barred. Lady Sivra spoke first, voice cold and precise. This does not prove guilt, she said. It proves leverage. Serric's voice dropped to something dangerous. It proves he positioned himself to control the bond, he said. Ada's fingers curled around her cup until the warmth stung her skin. So he can declare me invalid, she said, and fracture me. Olind nodded miserably. If he can bind witness to the statute, he whispered. If he can convince the court that your recognition is a mistake. Ada's pulse hammered. Then we need to take his leverage away, she said. Serric's eyes held hers. Yes, he said softly. And we need to learn how he fed the altar. Lady Sivra's gaze sharpened. We begin by auditing access to the older volumes, she said. Olind, seal the statute shelves. Fenna, place guards at the chapel corridor and the registry. Fenna nodded once, already moving. Nessa looked at Ada, and her voice softened. You did something impossible, she murmured. But don't do it again without preparation. That warmth you lost, if you keep paying it, you'll stop being able to feel your own hands. Ada swallowed. Is that how the transformation works? She asked quietly. By paying pieces of myself. Nessa's gaze flicked to Serric, then back. Sometimes, she said. Sometimes it's memory. Sometimes it's name weight. Warmth is the kindest cost, in a way. It hurts, but it doesn't hollow you. Ada stared at her hands. They looked the same, but she could still feel the ghost of that cold, like a shadow under skin. Serric's voice came low. I won't let you pay that again, he said. Ada lifted her gaze. You can't decide that, she said, not harshly. Just true. Serric went still. Then, slowly, he nodded. You're right, he said. I can't. He hesitated, then added, very carefully, but I can ask you not to. Ada's throat tightened at the shift from command to request. It was a small thing, but in a vow-bound world, it meant everything. I'll be careful, Ada said. Serric's eyes softened. Thank you, he said, and this time the thanks did not feel like a hook. It felt like a hand held out and not grasped. That night, Ada did not sleep much. Her body shook with aftercold, even with Nessa's heat stitches. Her mind ran loops around the same thought. Someone had designed a net made of law and ritual, and she had stepped into it like a rabbit in snow. Near midnight, a soft tapping came at her door, 2 taps, then 1. The rhythm had become familiar, Fenna's signal. Ada opened the door a hand's width. Marshal Fenna stood in the corridor, face grim. My queen, he said quietly. A message came through the border wards. Ada's heart lurched. From my father? Fenna nodded once. We caught it, he said. It came through thin. Like it was squeezed. Ada's breath hitched. What did it say? Fenna's jaw flexed. It wasn't his voice, he said. Not fully. But the meaning was clear. Ada's stomach dropped. Meaning? Fenna's eyes held hers with blunt honesty. Someone has been to Brindlehook, he said. Someone asked after you. And your father, he's frightened. Cold flooded Ada's veins. Who? She whispered. Fenna shook his head. The ward couldn't hold a face, he said. Only a phrase. Ada swallowed hard. What phrase? Fenna's voice went lower. They told him, he said, that you are dead in the Evergloam. That the keep will not return you. That if he wants your body, he should come to the forest edge at dawn. Ada's vision blurred. No, she whispered, horror blooming sharp. He'll go. Fenner's expression tightened. That's what they want, he said. Ada's hands clenched around the door's edge until her knuckles ached. We have to warn him, she said, voice shaking. We have to stop him. Fenner nodded. The king is already being summoned, he said. Lady Sivra is with him. Ada's breath came fast. The bond pulsed in her chest, urgent, insistent, pulling her toward action. She didn't wait to be escorted. She moved down the corridor with Fenner at her side, her bare feet silent on stone, her heart beating like a drum. They found Serric in the small message-well chamber, the brazier already lit. Lady Sivra stood rigid beside it, Olland clutching a ledger, Nessa hovering with a fistful of heat stitches as if she could sew the world shut. Serric turned when Ada entered. His eyes were bright, fierce. He's going to the border, Serric said, voice rough. Your father. Ada's throat burned. They're baiting him, she whispered. Serric nodded once. Yes, he said. And they're baiting you. Ada went cold all over again. Me? Lady Sivra's voice was sharp. If your father crosses into the warded edge, the keep will feel it, she said. And the queen will feel it. The bond will pull you toward him like a hook in flesh. Nessa's eyes flashed. That's a tug chime on a bigger scale, she whispered. A living tug. Ada's hands trembled. She pictured her father's face in the firelight, his quiet stubbornness, the way he would go even if his fear screamed at him, because he would rather die looking for her than live believing he'd abandoned her. I have to stop him, Ada said, voice breaking. Serric stepped closer, careful not to touch. We will, he said. But not by running blind into the Evergloam. Ada swallowed hard. Then how? Olland cleared his throat, voice trembling. We can send a counter-message, he said. A stronger one. If the writ recognizes the queen, if the witness is clear, the border wards might carry it farther. Lady Sivra's gaze narrowed. But it will cost, she said. Ada's chest tightened. Cost. Warmth, memory, name weight. Serric's eyes held Ada's. If we do this, he said softly, the bond will amplify you. It will make your voice carry. And it may reveal you to whoever is pulling the other end. Ada's mouth went dry. So they'll know I care, she whispered. Serric's voice was very quiet. They already know, he said. They tested you. You saved me. You didn't hide. Caring is written all over you. Ada's throat burned. She pressed a hand to her sternum, feeling the bond's ember pulse. Then I'll use it, she said, and her voice steadied, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had no time to be in charge. Serric's gaze sharpened with something like pride and terror combined. Then we do it with structure, he said. He knelt at the brazier and fed it the rosemary petal blend again. The smoke rose in a thin line, more eager this time, curling toward the window as if it could smell the border. Say his name, Serric murmured. Ada's voice trembled. Wylam. The smoke shivered, tightening. Now speak, Serric said. Only truth. Only intent. Ada closed her eyes and pictured her father standing at the forest edge, snow at his boots, lantern in hand. She poured herself into the image like a hand into a glove. Father, she said, voice clear despite the shake in it. Do not go to the Evergloam at dawn. It is a lie. I am alive. I am safe. Stay in the village. Lock the door. Do not follow anyone who claims to know me. The smoke thickened, then shot toward the window in a sudden coil like a rope thrown hard. Ada's chest flared hot. The bond pulsed, amplifying, and warmth drained from her ribs outward. She swayed, suddenly cold. Nessa caught her elbow. Easy, she hissed, pressing a heat stitch into Ada's palm. Ada clenched it, forcing herself to keep speaking. If you love me, she whispered, voice breaking, stay alive. Wait for my word again. I will send it. I love you. The smoke vanished into the glass. The brazier flame dimmed. Ada sagged, breath coming fast. Her fingers were numb, her skin prickling with cold. But beneath the cold, she felt something else, like a line cast into the distance, taut with hope. Serric rose slowly. He looked at Ada as if he wanted to wrap her in warmth with his bare hands and couldn't risk it. Lady Sivra's voice was clipped. "Now," she said, "we prepare for the second strike." Ada lifted her head, eyes stinging. "Second," she whispered. Serric's gaze turned toward the corridor, toward the deep keep where shadows held secrets. His voice came low, dangerous and certain. "They used your father as bait," he said. "That means they're done testing whether you matter." The bond pulsed, hot and ominous, like a warning bell. "And now," Serric said softly, "they'll try to take you." The keep changed after midnight. It wasn't the obvious kind of change, like a door suddenly appearing where there had been wall, though Ada had learned those were possible too. It was subtler, an extra draft where the air should have been still, a faint shift in the blue flame's pitch, the sense that the stone beneath her feet was listening with teeth bared instead of merely attentive. Ada sat on the edge of her bed, the heat stitch clenched in her palm until its warmth had soaked into her skin. The cold from the message rite lingered anyway, lodged deep in her bones. Each time she inhaled, she tasted rosemary and smoke and something sharper, like metal. Nessa had insisted on staying near, perched in a chair by the hearth with her bundle of pins like a nest of silver thorns. Marshal Fenner's presence in the corridor was a steady weight through the door. Lady Sivra had gone to tighten the court's tongue, as she'd put it, which Ada suspected meant scaring certain nobles into silence with a stare that could crack ice. Serric had walked her back to her chamber and then stopped at the threshold, tension strung tight in his shoulders. "They'll come where the rules are weakest," he'd said quietly. "Where writ is old, witness is pliable, and word can be twisted." "The chapel," Ada had whispered. Serric's jaw had tightened. "Yes." Now, in the hush before dawn, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that the keep itself was holding its breath. A soft tap came at her door, 2, then 1. Fenner's signal. But it sounded wrong. Too light. Too careful. Nessa's head lifted instantly, eyes narrowing. She didn't speak, didn't dare, but she rose from her chair and moved between Ada and the door with quick, quiet intent. Another tap. 2, then 1. Ada's pulse hammered. She pressed a hand to her chest and felt the bond pulse once, warmer than fear, like it was awake too. Nessa whispered, barely moving her lips, "Don't answer." Ada nodded. The latch clicked. Not from Ada's side. The door opened a fraction. Nessa's eyes widened. She shoved Ada backward with a firm hand to the shoulder and snatched a pin from her hair so fast Ada barely saw it move. A pale face slid into the gap. Not Fenner. One of the ward guards, one Ada had seen only at a distance. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, as if he were walking in sleep. "My queen," he murmured. Nessa's voice snapped, low and vicious. "You're not on duty." The guard blinked slowly, his gaze sliding over her as if she were not fully there. "My queen," he repeated, and the words sounded like someone else's hand inside his mouth. Ada's skin prickled. "Winter sleep," she whispered. Nessa's pin flashed up and pressed against the guard's throat, not piercing, just threatening. "Who sent you?" she hissed. The guard's lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't language. It was a faint chiming, like the tug chimes call but deeper, layered, as if 3 bells rang at once. Ada's bond flared hot. She gasped and clutched her chest. The guard's eyes sharpened for a heartbeat, focused not on Nessa, but on Ada, as if something behind them had found its target. He shoved the door wide and lunged. Nessa moved like a cat. Her pin drove into the guard's sleeve seam with a sharp flick, and the cloth sparked blue-white. The guard recoiled as if burned, his arm jerking back. Nessa had stitched a ward into that dress. Ada hadn't realized it could bite. The guard snarled, not with his own voice, Ada was sure, and tried again, reaching past Nessa toward Ada with fingers that looked suddenly too long, too cold. Ada backed up until her calves hit the bed frame. Her mind raced through Lady Sivra's rules. Don't vow, don't promise, don't say no. It didn't matter. This wasn't a language trap. This was brute force. Nessa yanked another pin free and flung it to the floor. It didn't land like metal. It struck stone and bloomed into a thin net of pale light that snapped up around the guard's ankles, holding him for half a heartbeat, just enough. Nessa grabbed Ada's wrist. "Window," she hissed. Ada's eyes flew to the window. It was thick glass set into stone, rimed with frost. Not an escape. Another chiming pulse rang, this one in the corridor. Ada heard it, felt it, and knew in the same instant, there was more than one. The keep's blue flames dimmed. The corridor outside went suddenly quiet. Too quiet. Nessa swore under her breath and shoved Ada toward the hearth, toward the inner door that led to a small sitting room connected to her chamber. Go, she hissed. Don't speak. Don't bargain. Ada stumbled through the inner doorway, heart battering her ribs. Behind her, she heard fabric tear, a hiss of wardlight, the guard's guttural cry. Ada slammed the inner door and slid the bolt with shaking hands. The sitting room was dark except for the hearth's low glow. She backed away, panting, listening. Her breath sounded too loud. A faint sound came through the door, wood creaking. Then, soft as silk, a voice, "My queen." Ada froze. Not the guard's voice. Smooth, controlled, honey over iron. Mavrin. Ada's stomach turned to ice. She pressed her back against the stone wall, hands clenched at her sides. The bond in her chest pulsed hard, as if warning her not to answer. Mavrin's voice continued, gentle as a lullaby. Do not be frightened. You are safe. There has been a breach in the wards, and we must relocate you for your protection. Relocate. Safeguard. Contain. Ada's teeth clenched. She did not answer. On the other side of the inner door, Mavrin sighed softly, as if disappointed. I know you can hear me, he said. Silence is wise. But it will not keep you safe. A pause, then another voice, faint, strained, familiar in the way a dream is familiar. Ada. Ada's throat seized. Her father's voice. Wylam. It came through thinly, as if carried through a long corridor of wind and stone. Ada, are you there? Ada, I. Ada's vision blurred. Her chest flared hot. The bond tugged, not physically like the courtyard chime, but emotionally harder. Like a hook in her heart. No, she whispered, the sound ripping out of her despite herself. Then she slapped her own hand over her mouth, horrified. Mavrin's voice softened. There, he murmured. That's better. We can work with truth. Ada's pulse hammered. That wasn't her father. It couldn't be. Serric had warned her, the curse twisted paths. The wards could carry meaning without face. Someone could mimic. And yet, Wylam's cadence was right. The way he said her name like it was both scolding and prayer. Ada, the voice said again, breaking. Please, if you can hear, don't leave me in the dark. Ada's chest ached with a pain so sharp it felt like a blade under her ribs. Tears burned her eyes. Mavrin spoke again, a thread weaving around the voice like vines around a sapling. Your father is at the border, he said gently. He received your message. He panicked. He came anyway. The forest is hostile tonight, more hostile than it has been in years. We can save him, but only if you help stabilize the wards. Ada's nails dug into her palm. Stabilize. The same word Lady Sivra had used for the bond. Mavrin's tone was kindly, patient. You did it for the king, he said. In the chapel. You can do it again. The difference is, if you refuse now, your father will pay the cost. Ada squeezed her eyes shut. The keep seemed to lean in, listening. Say nothing, Nessa had warned. Don't bargain. Ada's hand shook over her mouth. Her breath came in ragged pulls. Outside, faintly, she heard another scuffle, cloth, footsteps, the thud of a body. Nessa's voice, low and sharp with pain, run. Ada's stomach clenched. She had to get to Serric. To Fenna. To anyone who could cut this net. The sitting room had another door, a narrow servant passage that Lady Sivra had pointed out earlier as a safe route in case of fire. Ada had thought it a kindness. Now she wondered if kindness existed at all here, or only contingency plans. Ada moved as silently as she could toward the servant door. Mavrin's voice rose slightly, still gentle, but with an edge. My queen, he said. If you step out of that chamber, the keep will interpret it as flight. And flight, in old statutes, is admission. Ada froze mid-step. Admission. Words that became law. Mavrin murmured, almost conversational, the crown bond is fragile. A frightened queen running from council can be recorded as evidence of invalid witness. Ada's throat went dry. He was trying to herd her with language, not walls. She forced herself to breathe. Think like Lady Sivra taught you. Answer with questions. Step where the floor is solid. Ada swallowed and spoke, carefully, one sentence carved slow. If my father is at the border, she said, why would he be speaking through my door? Silence. Then the voice, Wylam's voice, shifted, faltered. Mavrin answered smoothly, the keep carries sound where it can. We used a message channel. It's imperfect. Ada's bond pulsed, tight. Ada forced herself to continue, still slow. Then bring Marshal Fenner, she said. Let him witness. Let Lady Sivra witness. Let Serric witness. If this is truth, it will hold under witness. Another pause. Mavrin's voice cooled by a fraction. The king is occupied, he said. The marshal is compromised. Lady Sivra is in council. There is no time. No time. Always no time when someone wanted you rushed into a mistake. Ada's eyes slid to the servant door again. Her hand hovered near the latch. From outside the inner door came a soft scrape metal on wood. A key. Mavrin was unlocking her from the wrong side again. Ada's heart slammed against her ribs. The bolt on her side would buy moments, not safety. She didn't wait. Ada slipped through the servant door and pulled it shut behind her, heart hammering. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, lit only by thin slits of blue flame that seemed half asleep. The air was colder here, thick with dust and old rosemary. Ada moved barefoot on stone, each step silent but for her own ragged breath. The keep shifted around her. At first it was subtle, a corner she remembered turned left, but now turned right. A stairwell's steps felt longer than they should. The blue flames guttered and flared in strange rhythms, as if the castle itself was confused about which way to guide her. The bond in Ada's chest tugged, not toward Serric, not toward the hearthwing, but toward the chapel. A hard pull, like a rope suddenly tightened. Ada stumbled, catching herself on the wall. Panic surged. Mavrin had said flight would be recorded. But she hadn't fled council. She'd fled a trap. Would the keep know the difference? Or would it accept the first narrative fed into its writ? The corridor ahead shimmered faintly, like cold air over ice. Ada recognized the sensation from the chapel, a line of witness. Her mouth went dry. No, she whispered, then stopped, remembering. Don't refuse. Don't vow. She swallowed and tried again, quieter, not a refusal. Not that way, she breathed, and pressed her palm to the wall as if she could feel where stone wanted her to go. To her shock, she could. Under her skin, she felt thin threads, ward lines, like seams in cloth. The keep was stitched. And the bond made her able to sense the stitches. Ada closed her eyes and listened with that new sense. The chapel's pull was strong, but it was not the only path. There was another thread, fainter, warmer, leading toward the hearthwing where Serric had promised protection. Ada followed the warmer thread. The corridor narrowed, then opened abruptly onto a small stairwell. Ada climbed, breath burning. At the top, a door stood ajar, spilling orange light. Relief surged, then died. The room beyond was not the hearthwing. It was the grand hall. The hearth at the far end glowed low. Shadows pooled between pillars. And standing near the fire, as if waiting for her like a guest, was Chancellor Mavrin Skell. He was alone. No guards. No court. Just him, composed as a blade in a velvet sheath. Ada halted in the doorway, chest tight. The bond in her sternum pulsed like a warning bell. Mavrin turned his head toward her with measured calm. His eyes swept over her bare feet, her disheveled hair, the heat stitch clenched in her fist. My queen, he said softly. You shouldn't wander. Ada didn't move. Where is Nessa? She demanded, then cursed herself, too sharp, too emotional. Mavrin's expression stayed smooth. The seamstress is unharmed, he said. She interfered, of course, but winter sleep is not death. She will wake. Ada's stomach twisted. You put her in winter sleep, she whispered. I redirected a tool, Mavrin corrected mildly. As one does when tools are in the way. Ada's hands clenched. She remembered the glassy-eyed guard, the chiming pulse in his mouth. "You're controlling them," she said. "You're pushing winter sleep into people like a knife." Mavrin's eyes gleamed faintly. "Control is such a crude word," he said. "I prefer stewardship." Ada's breath came fast. "Where is Serric?" Mavrin's smile widened slightly. "Your husband is occupied," he said. "Lady Sivra and Marshal Fenner are very busy putting out the fires I set. You slipped through while their attention was elsewhere." Ada's skin went cold. "You wanted me here." Mavrin inclined his head. "Yes," he said simply. Ada's bond flared hot, and the air in the hall tightened, as if the keep recognized conflict. Mavrin lifted his hands, palms outward. Serric's gesture mirrored. It made Ada's stomach turn. "Do not fear," he said, voice gentle. "I don't intend to harm you." Ada laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You already did." Mavrin's gaze softened, almost pitying. "A bruise is not harm," he said. "Not compared to what will happen if you remain tied to a broken crown." Ada's throat tightened. "You broke it," she said. Mavrin's eyes flickered, the first hint of something real. "I preserved it," he said quietly. "For the realm." Ada stared. "By turning your king into a beast." Mavrin's jaw tightened a fraction, then smoothed again. "Serric is a good man," he said. "But goodness is not governance. When the old winter came, when our borders weakened, Serric refused the measures that would have saved us. He would not bind human villages to our ward net. He would not levy the blood tithe. He would not," his voice sharpened, "do what was required." Ada's stomach churned. Blood tithe. She had heard border tales about Fae asking for blood. She'd never believed them. Now she didn't know what to believe. Mavrin stepped closer, slow, unthreatening. "So I made a choice," he said. "I took the crown from hands that wouldn't use it. I anchored winter. I bought time." Ada's voice shook. "You cursed him." Mavrin's gaze held hers. "I contained him," he said. "And I contained the realm's panic." There was peace. Quiet. Stillness. No wars. No starving. No human entanglement. Ada's mouth went dry. "A frozen kingdom," she whispered. "A kingdom that couldn't breathe." Mavrin smiled faintly. "Breathing is overrated," he murmured. "It leads to mess." Ada's anger flared hot. "You're monstrous," she spat. Mavrin's expression did not change. "And yet," he said, voice soft, "I am the one who kept the ledgers balanced. Who kept the border wards from collapsing entirely. Who kept this keep from crumbling into snow." Ada's chest tightened with sudden fear. Because part of it sounded plausible. Not that it justified anything, but that it meant the realm had been dependent on him. Mavrin's gaze slid toward the chapel corridor, then back. "When you stumbled into the keep," he said, "I thought you were a fluke. A human mouse caught in a trap meant for kings. Then you bled on the altar." Ada's bond pulsed hard. Mavrin's voice dropped lower, almost reverent. "Do you know what you did?" he asked. "You provided the one thing the altar had been starved of, a human witness." The bond woke because it recognized usefulness. Ada's stomach turned. "I'm not useful," she said hoarsely. "I'm a person." Mavrin's eyes gleamed. "Yes," he said. "A person with leverage." Ada's throat tightened. "So you tried to kill me." Mavrin sighed. "No," he said, almost patiently. "If I wanted you dead, you would be dead. I tried to test you. To see whether you were pliable, whether you would panic, whether you would cling." Ada's fists clenched. "And my father," she demanded. "Was that him? Was that even real?" For the first time, Mavrin's smile faltered, just barely. "Your father is real," he said. "And he is frightened. That is what fathers do when their daughters vanish." Ada's knees threatened to give out. "You sent someone to Brindlehook." Mavrin's gaze slid away for a heartbeat, then returned. "A messenger," he said. "A whisper. A nudge. I needed to see how far your bond would pull you." Ada's vision blurred with fury and grief. "You used him," she whispered. "I used a truth," Mavrin corrected. "Your father would come. You would respond." And now, you're here. Ada swallowed hard, forcing herself to think. Why, she asked, voice shaking. If you wanted control, why not just invalidate me in the registry? Why bother with all this? Mavrin's eyes sharpened. Because invalidation requires witness, he said. And the only witness powerful enough to override a crown bond is the altar that birthed it. Ada's skin prickled. The chapel, she whispered. Mavrin nodded. I can't tear you out of the bond here, he said. Not cleanly. But in the chapel, where old statutes still listen, where I am recognized as efficient under crisis code, his smile returned, smooth as ice. I can declare the bond defective. Ada's breath hitched. And what happens to me then? Mavrin's voice softened, almost kind. You will sleep, he said. A gentle winter sleep. Long enough for the realm to settle. Long enough for Serric to, his gaze flicked toward the hearth, toward the shadow that had once shown a kingly outline. Break without you anchoring him. Ada went cold. You want him unstable, she whispered. Mavrin's eyes gleamed. I want him irrelevant, he said. Ada's chest flared hot with fear. She felt the bond pulse, urgent, pulling toward Serric, toward the one person who could stand against this. Mavrin stepped closer. Come, he said gently. Do not make this uglier than it must be. Ada backed up a step, her heels hitting the stone threshold behind her. No, she blurted, then froze, heart pounding. She had refused. The air in the hall tightened like a drawn string. Mavrin's smile sharpened. Ah, he murmured. There it is. Ada swallowed hard, trying to correct, to soften, to undo the hook she'd just thrown into the air. She started. Mavrin lifted a hand. Don't, he said softly. You already spoke. The keep heard. Ada's stomach dropped. That's not fair, she whispered. Fairness is for hearthtales, Mavrin said, voice calm. This is law. Ada's bond flared hard enough to make her gasp. For a heartbeat she felt two pulls at once, the keep tightening around her refusal like a record, and the bond tugging toward the chapel. The floor under Ada's feet chilled. Frost crept across the threshold stones. Ada stumbled back into the hall, panic rising. Serric, she shouted, and the name echoed up into the dark rafters. The keep listened. The keep answered. Not with Serric. With movement. From between the pillars, figures emerged, ward guards with glassy eyes, their steps silent, their faces blank with winter sleep. 3. Then 5. Then more, forming a widening arc like a net closing. Ada's blood ran cold. Stop, she said, then clamped her mouth shut, remembering. Too late. Mavrin watched, calm as a man observing a well-run machine. Do not struggle, he said. You'll only feed the witness more chaos. Ada's mind raced. She needed a different witness, one not under Mavrin's hand. She clutched the heat stitch in her palm and felt its warmth fade. Nessa's warning echoed, warmth is a kind cost, but it drains you. Ada lifted her gaze to the high windows of the hall, frosted and dark. Beyond them, the storm muttered. Beyond them, the border. Beyond them, her father. And somewhere in this keep, Serric. Ada's bond pulsed again, harder. As if sensing her desperation, it offered its thread like a rope thrown into her hands. She didn't know spells, but she knew rope. Ada closed her eyes for a heartbeat and focused inward, on the ember in her chest. She imagined it not as a feeling, but as a seam. A stitch. A line connecting her to Serric. She reached for it with her will. The thread responded, taut and bright beneath her skin. Ada didn't speak a vow. She didn't promise. She didn't refuse. She simply poured intent into the thread like warmth into a cup. Find him, she thought fiercely. Tell him. The ember flared, and for a split second Ada felt as if her heartbeat echoed in another chest. Then pain lanced through her ribs. Ada gasped, staggering. The cost hit warmth, sharp and immediate, bleeding out of her fingers and into the bond. The guards surged forward. Ada turned and ran. Not toward the chapel. Away from it. She sprinted between pillars, bare feet slapping stone, breath tearing out of her lungs. Behind her, silent footsteps pursued. Mavrin's voice followed, unhurried. You cannot outrun the keep, my queen. The hall's corridors shifted as Ada reached them, doors appearing where there shouldn't be doors, passageways narrowing like throats. The keep tried to guide her, her bond tugged toward the chapel, and the stone complied, reshaping to funnel her there. Ada pressed her palm to the wall and felt the ward lines under her skin again. The seams. The stitches. If the keep could be stitched, it could be unstitched. Ada found a seam and pushed against it with her will, the same way she'd pushed against the bond in the chapel to brace Serric. The seam resisted, then gave a fraction. A door that had been closed a breath ago swung open. Ada dove through and slammed it behind her. The corridor beyond was narrow, cold, and unfamiliar. Blue flames guttered. Frost crawled thick. The air smelled of old rosemary and iron. The chapel corridor. The keep had guided her anyway. Ada's stomach dropped. Footsteps approached from behind the door. Soft scraping, fingers, claws, something trying the latch. Ada ran again, deeper, heart hammering, the bond tugging hard now, almost nauseating. Her chest felt tight, as if the thread inside her was being reeled in. At the stairwell down, Ada's foot slipped on frost. She grabbed the wall and steadied herself, cold biting her palm. She descended 2 steps at a time, breath burning. At the bottom, the chapel doorway yawned open. Cold light spilled out. Ada halted at the threshold, panting. Her body screamed to turn and flee. Her bond screamed to go in. And then, behind her, the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. Mavrin's voice drifted down the stairs, soft as falling snow. There you are, he said. Ada turned. He stood at the top of the stairwell, framed by blue flame. Behind him, ward guards filled the corridor like pale statues. Their eyes were glass. Their faces were blank. Ada's throat tightened. You can't make me, she said, then winced words, again. She forced herself to breathe and tried to correct. I won't know, that was worse. Mavrin descended slowly, unhurried. I don't need to make you, he said. Your bond will do it for me. The pull in Ada's chest tightened like a hook. She staggered, hand flying to her sternum. Mavrin's eyes gleamed. Feel that, he murmured. That's witness, my queen. The chapel recognizes its own work. It wants you inside so it can finish the sentence you began. Ada's breath came in ragged gasps. The bond pulsed hot. Warmth drained from her fingers again, too much, too fast. Her vision wavered. She stumbled backward, 1 step, then another, until the chapel's cold air wrapped around her like water. The moment Ada crossed the threshold, the air snapped. The altar glowed brighter. The silver groove lit up like a ring of moonlight. Mavrin followed her inside, stopping just short of the altar as if he knew precisely where the witness line lay. Do you see, he murmured. Everything here is older than your fear. Older than your stubbornness. The chapel doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about alignment. Ada's teeth chattered, though she didn't know if it was cold or terror. She backed away, pressing her shoulders against a stone bench. Mavrin lifted a small ledger volume from inside his coat, thin, bound in dark leather, stamped with the closed-eye sigil. Rite, he said softly, and opened it. The pages shimmered, frost-thin. Ada could feel their intent like pressure against her skin. Mavrin's voice was calm, measured. Witness, he said, and his gaze flicked to the altar. And now. Word. Ada's stomach dropped. He was about to speak something that would bind. Ada's mind raced. If word was the final anchor, then interrupting word might disrupt the structure. But she couldn't shout. She couldn't promise. She couldn't refuse. Every sentence could become a hook. She needed another kind of word. Truth. A statement of self, as in the registry. Ada drew a shaky breath. My name is Ada Wrenfall, she said, voice trembling but clear. The chapel's pressure shifted, as if considering. The silver groove brightened, then steadied. Mavrin's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, he murmured, amused. Hold to your human scraps. It won't save you. Ada forced herself to continue, each word carved slow. I did not choose this bond, she said. But I am here. I am alive. I am not your tool. The chapel hummed, low and tense. Mavren's smile sharpened. Lovely, he said. Defiant statements. They make such satisfying records. He lifted his gaze, voice dropping into something ceremonial. By Crisis Statute of the Islith Crown, he began, I, Mavren Skell, administrative officiant, declare. The chapel's light flared. Ada's bond screamed hot. Her breath caught. Mavren continued, steady, the crown bond defective by improper witness, improperly trained consort, and unstable keep. Ada's mind raced. He was feeding the chapel a narrative, improper witness, unstable keep. If the chapel accepted those as truth, it would fracture the bond. Ada needed to introduce a counter-truth with stronger witness. Not the altar. Not the keep. Not the court. Serric. Ada reached inward again, toward the thread connecting her to him. It pulsed weakly, she had drained warmth twice already. Her fingers were numb. Her vision tunneled. She pushed anyway. Serric, she thought fiercely. Serric, hear me. The bond pulsed once, then pain lanced up Ada's spine like ice. Ada gasped and dropped to her knees. Mavren's voice continued, inexorable. And therefore invalid without full ceremonial reinforcement. The consort's recognition is hereby suspended. Ada's vision blurred. Cold flooded her limbs. Winter sleep creeping in. She clutched at the stone floor, nails scraping. No, she whispered instinctively, then hated it. The chapel heard. The chapel tightened. Mavren's smile widened. Yes, he murmured. Struggle. Panic. Give the witness what it expects. Ada's throat burned. Her mind scattered. She tried to remember her father's face, his eyes, his hands, and found the image slipping, as if frost had settled on the memory's edges. Fear surged, memory cost. Had she paid memory without realizing? Ada squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the numbness. Wylam, she whispered, clinging to the name like a rope. Mavren's voice softened, almost tender. Ah, he said. There. That's the right kind of leverage. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Ada. He knelt with measured grace, holding the ledger open so its frost page hovered in Ada's line of sight. See, he murmured. The writ already prepares to record your suspension. If you cooperate, I can make it gentler. If you fight, the fracture will tear. Ada's chest tightened. What do you want? She rasped. Mavren's eyes gleamed. I want the realm stable, he said. I want the crown back where it belongs. In capable hands. Ada's teeth chattered. Yours, she whispered. Mavren didn't deny it. Yes, he said softly. Mine. Ada's stomach turned. She forced herself to breathe, to stay awake. The chapel hummed, cold and eager, as if it anticipated the moment her will would give way. Then, a sound like stone cracking. Not from the altar. From the doorway. The chapel's cold pressure shifted as if startled. The blue flames along the walls flared. A silhouette filled the entrance. Serric. He stood framed by the corridor's pale light, his beast form massive, shoulders hunched as if containing rage. Frost crawled along his arms, but his eyes burned bright and focused, not glassy like winter sleep. Beside him stood Marshal Fenner, blade drawn. Lady Sivra followed, expression carved from ice. Ollind clutched a ledger, face pale. Nessa was not with them. Ada's throat tightened so hard she could barely breathe. Serric's gaze locked on Ada on the floor, then on Mavren kneeling over her. Something in Serric went very still. Mavren, Serric said, voice low enough to vibrate in stone. Mavren rose smoothly, unhurried. Your Majesty, he said, calm as a man greeting a guest at dinner. You arrived in time to witness proper correction. Lady Sivra's voice snapped. You are in violation of court code, she said. You entered the chapel with coercive intent. Mavren's smile flickered. Coercion, he murmured. I am preventing catastrophe. The Queen is unstable. The keep is unstable. The bond is unstable. I am the only one acting responsibly. Ada pushed up onto her hands, trembling. Cold had numbed her legs. Her fingers were stiff. Serric took one step into the chapel and stopped, as if an invisible line halted him. The altar's glow brightened at his presence. The chapel listened harder. Serric's voice was careful, controlled. "Step away from her," he said. Mavrin lifted the ledger slightly. "If I do," he said softly, "the fracture may complete. She may fall into winter sleep. Perhaps forever. You'd prefer that?" Serric's claws flexed. Ada could see the war in him, the urge to tear Mavrin apart versus the fear of harming Ada with a rash move. Ada swallowed hard and forced her voice through numb lips. "Don't touch me," she rasped, and the words were weak but real. Mavrin's gaze slid to her with faint amusement. "My queen," he murmured, "you are beyond your depth." Serric's eyes narrowed. "She is not," he said, voice low. Mavrin's gaze turned to Serric. "You think so?" he asked gently. "Then answer me this, Your Majesty. If the bond is truly stable, why does it require her warmth as payment every time it holds you together? Why is she changing while you remain what you are?" Ada's chest tightened. The question was meant to hook, to needle Serric's shame. Serric's jaw clenched. "Because I was cursed," he said. "And who maintained that curse?" Mavrin asked softly, eyes gleaming. "Who kept your kingdom quiet while you roamed these halls as a beast? Who kept the ledgers balanced? Who kept the border wards from collapsing into human lands? You call me villain, but you never asked who held the realm when you could not." Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed to slits. "You held it because you stole it," she said. Mavrin's smile sharpened. "Stole," he murmured. "Or inherited necessity?" Serric's voice went colder. "You fed the counterrite into the chapel," he said. "You sent tug chimes. You put my guards into winter sleep. You tried to take my queen." Mavrin sighed, as if weary of being misunderstood. "I tried to contain an error," he corrected. Ada's fingers dug into stone. "I'm not an error," she whispered, voice shaking. The chapel hummed, and Ada felt something shift. Her words, spoken here, held weight. "Witness." Mavrin's eyes flicked briefly toward the altar, then back to Ada. "You are a lever," he said softly. "Whether you want to be or not." Fenna's blade lifted slightly. "Say that again," he snarled. Mavrin didn't look at him. He looked at Serric. "You cannot win here by force," he said gently. "The chapel recognizes me as efficient under crisis statute. If you attack me within its witness, it will record you as unlawful king. The writ will fracture your legitimacy again. You'll return to beast, perhaps worse. And she," his gaze slid to Ada, "will be the casualty." Serric's eyes burned. He did not move. Ada saw the trap clearly now. Mavrin had chosen the chapel because it was a court of law as much as stone. Serric's strength was bound by rules. Ada's life hung on those rules. Lady Sivra's voice cut in, crisp. "You cannot invoke crisis statute," she said, "without proving crisis through proper witness." Mavrin's eyes gleamed. "The keep itself is crisis," he said. "The queen's instability is crisis. The king's cursed form is crisis." Ada's stomach turned. He was building his case with words, the way he always did. Olin's voice shook as he spoke, but he spoke anyway. "The statute requires 3 witnesses," he said, clutching his ledger. "Not one." Mavrin's gaze slid to him like a knife. "And you," Mavrin said softly, "are too frightened to witness anything honestly." Olind flinched. His hands trembled. Ada saw the fear in him, a lifetime of surviving by staying small. Lady Sivra stepped forward, chin lifted. "I witness," she said, voice like ice, "that you are coercing the queen." Mavrin's smile thinned. "You are biased," he murmured. Fenna stepped forward, blade still up. "I witness," he said, "that you arranged an assault." Mavrin's gaze remained calm. "You are a soldier," he said, "not a lawful witness." Olind's throat bobbed. He began. Mavrin's eyes pinned him. "If you lie," Mavrin murmured, "the writ will take your voice. You know that." Olind swallowed hard. He looked like a man about to drown. Ada's chest tightened. If Olind didn't witness, Mavrin's statute might hold. If he did witness falsely, the writ could punish him. Ada forced herself up onto her knees, shaking. The cold in her limbs was heavy, But her mind snapped into fierce clarity. Witness could be a person, a place, or the land itself. The chapel was a place witness. But it could also be overwritten by other witnesses if something stronger spoke. Ada pressed her hand to her chest and felt the bond's ember pulse, weak but alive. The bond itself was a witness. Ada drew a breath and spoke, careful, carved slow. The bond is the witness, she said, voice trembling but clear. It knows coercion. The chapel hummed louder, as if startled by the claim. Mavrin's smile sharpened. The bond is defective, he said smoothly. That's what I'm correcting. Ada's eyes burned with cold tears. Then ask it, she said. Silence fell. Even Lady Sivra froze. Mavrin's eyes narrowed slightly. Ask it, he repeated, amused. How? Ada's breath shook. With truth, she said. Not statute tricks. Mavrin's smile widened. Truth is not magic, he murmured. It is in this keep, Ada whispered, and felt the chapel tighten around the words, listening. Serric's gaze was fixed on her, something fierce and soft tangled together. Ada's voice steadied despite her trembling. You want to declare me invalid, she said to Mavrin. So declare it with the bond as witness. If the bond agrees, I'll accept the cost. Serric's eyes flared. Ada, he rasped, warning. Ada looked at him. Her lips trembled. I won't be dragged, she whispered. I won't be hidden. I won't be decided by ledgers alone. The bond pulsed, hot and aching, as if approving the insistence. Mavrin studied her, and for the first time his calm slipped enough to reveal annoyance. You don't understand what you're asking, he said. I understand enough, Ada said. Either you're right and the bond is defective, or you're lying. The chapel hummed, tense. Mavrin's gaze flicked to the altar, calculating. He could refuse the challenge, but refusing might look like fear under witness. His smile returned, thinner. Very well, he said softly. Let the bond witness. He lifted his ledger and stepped closer to the altar, voice dropping into ceremony. Witness of the chapel, witness of the land within these stones, he said, and the air tightened. Witness of the crown bond. Ada's chest flared hot, the ember pulsing painfully. Mavrin continued, smooth as ice. I declare the consort's recognition improperly formed, her testimony unreliable, her presence destabilizing. The bond in Ada's chest screamed. Not approval. Rejection. A violent surge of heat and cold at once. Ada gasped, clutching her sternum. The ember flared bright, then tightened like a fist. Mavrin's eyes widened a fraction. He felt it too. The bond did not accept his narrative. The chapel's light flickered, uncertain. Serric took a step forward, and this time the invisible line did not stop him. The altar's glow shifted, as if recognizing him differently, less as cursed beast, more as king. Mavrin's calm cracked. No, he hissed, and the sound was the first truly ugly thing Ada had heard from him. Lady Sivra's eyes flashed. The bond rejects your word, she snapped. You are lying under witness. Mavrin's mouth tightened. It rejects because she's tied to him, he snarled softly. Biased, as you said. Ada's voice shook, but she forced it out. The bond doesn't care about politics, she rasped. It cares about alignment. And you're misaligned. Mavrin's eyes went cold. Then we do it the other way, he said, and before anyone could react, he flicked his hand toward Ada. A chiming pulse rang out, sharp, layered. Ada's bond yanked. Not toward the chapel. Toward her father. So hard she cried out. Pain lanced through her chest like a hook dragged through flesh. Her vision went white at the edges. She fell forward, catching herself on her hands, gasping. Mavrin's voice cut through, urgent now. Witness, he barked. Witness the Queen's instability. Witness her bond pulling her toward human ties, proof she cannot serve the crown. Ada's breath came in jagged sobs. The pull toward Wylam was agony. She saw, in her mind's eye, a lantern at a forest edge, a figure hunched against snow, her father. Too vivid. Too sharp. It felt real. Ada choked. Father, she whispered, and the name tore out of her like blood. The chapel hummed, eager to accept the new narrative. Mavrin had shifted witness, using Ada's human attachment as proof of defect. Serric snarled, a sound like stone breaking. He lunged. Lady Sivra shouted, "Don't!" Serric skidded to a halt, muscles taut. He couldn't strike. Not here. Not while the chapel listened for unlawful violence. Fenner raised his blade anyway, teeth bared. "I'll cut him," he snarled. Mavrin smiled, grim. "Do," he whispered. "And watch the writ record you as traitor." Ada clutched her chest, panting, tears freezing on her lashes. The bond's pull toward her father was a screaming rope. She was going to break. She could feel it, feel the seam splitting. And then, through the pain, Ada felt something else. Serric. Not his presence in the room. His presence in the bond. A steady heat like a hand reaching for hers. Ada's mind flashed back to the chapel earlier, how she'd braced him by holding the rope steady. Now she understood, she could brace herself the same way. Ada forced herself to focus inward, on the braided cord in her chest. 3 strands, word, writ, witness. Mavrin was yanking witness toward Wylam, trying to prove defect. Ada didn't sever the tie to her father. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Love wasn't a flaw. Instead, she anchored it. She wrapped her will around the witness strand and held it steady, not denying her father, but refusing to let him be used as a weapon. Warmth drained from her ribs, sharp and sudden. Her fingers went numb. Her breath fogged thick. But the pull eased a fraction. Enough to breathe. Ada lifted her head, shaking. "My father is not proof I'm defective," she rasped. "He is proof I'm alive." The chapel hummed, uncertain. Mavrin's eyes narrowed, furious now. "You stubborn little," he began, then caught himself, smoothing his tone back into silk. "My queen," he corrected, "you're exhausting yourself. Let go. Sleep. You'll wake in peace." Ada's lips trembled. "Peace," she whispered. "Like your frozen peace." Mavrin's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said softly. "Exactly like that." Ada looked at Serric. His eyes were bright with fury and something that looked like grief. He spoke, careful, controlled. "Ada," he said quietly, and her name in his mouth felt like warmth in winter. "Hold on." Ada swallowed. Her vision wavered. She could feel the cost stacking, warmth, warmth, warmth. Too much. Her mind flickered again, and for a heartbeat she couldn't remember the smell of her father's kitchen. Panic surged. Memory was slipping at the edges. No. Ada clung to the name again, not as a lever, but as a root. Wylam. Wrenfall. Ada Wrenfall. Lady Sivra moved like a blade, stepping closer to the altar with her chin lifted. "Chancellor," she said coldly, "you have spoken false word under witness. The court code allows consequence." Mavrin's smile was brittle. "Does it?" he murmured. "Or was that code written by those who wanted to bind me?" He flicked his fingers again, another chime. The ward guards in the doorway stirred, their glassy eyes sharpening. They moved, not toward Mavrin, but toward Serric, forming a wall between king and queen. Mavrin's voice dropped. "I can't strike you in the chapel, your majesty," he said softly. "But my sleepwalkers can. They have no law to violate." Serric's posture went deadly still. "If they harm her," he began. Mavrin smiled faintly. "Then what?" he asked. "You'll rage. You'll break. You'll prove me right." Ada's chest tightened. She saw the trap: provoke Serric into violence, make the chapel record him unlawful, fracture his legitimacy again. All while Ada collapsed. Ada's breath shook. She couldn't fight guards. She couldn't out-talk Mavrin. She could only hold the rope steady, hold the bond steady long enough for someone else to cut the net. "Olind." Ada's gaze snapped to the archivist. He stood near the doorway, clutching his ledger like a shield, eyes wide with terror. He looked at Ada like a man watching someone drown. Ada forced her voice through numb lips. "Olind," she whispered. He flinched, gaze snapping to her. Ada swallowed. "Witness," she rasped. "Write what you see. Don't let him rewrite." Mavrin's eyes cut to Olind, sharp. "Do nothing," he said softly, and the softness was threat. Olind's hands trembled. Ada's vision blurred. Cold crept up her limbs. Winter sleep licking at her. Serric's voice went low, intense. Ollind, he said, and though he didn't vow, the authority in the word was heavy. You asked for truth. This is it. Lady Sivra's eyes flashed. If you remain silent, she said to Ollind, you will be complicit. Ollind swallowed hard. His throat bobbed. Mavrin's smile returned, thin and cruel. If you witness against me, he murmured, the writ will demand payment. And you are not strong enough to pay. Ollind's eyes flicked to Ada, then to Serric, then to the altar. Then, with a sound like a sob swallowed, Ollind stepped forward. He lifted his ledger volume high, hands shaking, and spoke. Not a vow. Not a promise. A record. I witness, Ollind said, voice trembling but audible, that Chancellor Mavrin Skell invoked crisis statute under coercive intent. I witness that he fed a counter-rite into the chapel. I witness that he used tug chimes and winter sleep to assault the Queen. I witness that the bond rejected his word. The chapel hummed. Hard. As if the stones themselves had been struck. Mavrin's calm shattered into a snarl. You fool, he hissed. The altar's light flared, and for a heartbeat Ada felt the pressure shift, not in Mavrin's favor, but against him. The chapel did not like lies recorded under witness. Mavrin's eyes darted, calculating. He snapped the ledger shut and lifted his chin. Then we end this, he said. He turned, not toward Serric, but toward the altar, and pressed his palm to the silver groove. Blood welled instantly from his skin, as if he'd prepared the cut, as if the altar had been waiting for him. Ada's stomach dropped. He had bled here before. He had fed it. The silver groove drank his blood and blazed bright. The chapel's cold surged. Ada's bond yanked again, wild and painful. Her breath caught. Her vision tunneled. Mavrin's voice rose, louder now, ceremonial and furious. Witness of the altar, he intoned, accept my authority. Accept my officiant's right. Declare the bond severed. Serric snarled and stepped forward, and this time the chapel did not stop him. The altar's light flared in response to Serric's presence, as if recognizing a rightful weight. Mavrin's eyes widened, anger and fear flashing. No, he spat. You're still cursed, still unlawful. Serric's voice cut through, low and fierce. You don't get to define me, he said. Ada's chest burned. The bond pulsed, hot and aching, caught between two declarations. The chapel hummed, strained. If both spoke word under witness, the clash could fracture everything. Ada forced herself to breathe. Warmth was nearly gone. Memory frayed at the edges. She could feel winter sleep creeping up, heavy as stone. And yet, beneath it, Ada felt the ember in her chest still alive. The bond wasn't only a rope. It was a door. A door that could be closed by fear or opened by choice. Ada lifted her head, trembling, and looked at Serric. His beast face was fierce, but his eyes held her like he was afraid to blink. Ada gathered what strength she had and spoke, not a vow, not a promise, but a truth she could stand on. I'm here, she rasped. I'm awake. And I choose. Her breath hitched. She felt the chapel seize on the word choose like a starving thing. Ada forced herself to finish carefully, to stand with the truth. The chapel's hum shifted, uncertain, as if it didn't know how to record a choice without a vow. Mavrin snarled and lifted his bleeding hand, flinging a thin arc of blood toward the altar's groove. The silver blaze surged. Ada cried out, the bond yanking toward her father again, toward the border, toward a lantern in snow. And in the same instant, the chapel's cold slammed into her like a wave. Ada's body went numb. Her vision dimmed. She felt herself tipping not forward, not backward, but inward into a deep, heavy quiet. Winter sleep. Serric's roar shook the stones. Ada. Her name echoed like a bell through a fog. Ada tried to answer. Her lips didn't move. The last thing she saw was Serric lunging toward her, his claws outstretched, not to strike Mavrin, but to catch her before she vanished completely. And Mavrin's face, cold, triumphant, turning toward Serric as if to say, now break. Ada fell inward as if the chapel had opened beneath her like a trapdoor. The world dimmed to a tunnel of cold light and muffled sound. Somewhere far away, Serric's roar shook the stones, but it reached her like thunder heard from underwater. Her limbs were heavy. Her thoughts slowed. The bond's ember, once warm and insistent, shrunk to a tight spark cupped in darkness. Winter sleep, she thought dimly, and even the thought felt like it was being wrapped in frost. Hands caught her before she struck the floor. Serric's hands. He didn't hesitate now. If the chapel wanted to record him as unlawful for touching her, let it. Ada's body was slack in his arms, her breath thin and shallow, her lashes rimed with ice. The sight of her like that tore something raw through him, something older than law. Stay with me, Serric rasped, and even as the words left him he forced himself to wrench them back from the shape of a vow. He pressed his forehead to Ada's hair, the fur there warm against her cold temple, and breathed in as if he could share heat by will alone. Across the altar, Mavren's blood still glowed in the silver groove. His hand was raised again, ready to speak more word into the blaze. His face was tight with triumph gone sharp at the edges, like a man who had expected obedience and gotten chaos. Do you feel it? Mavren called, voice ringing with ceremony. The Queen's instability recorded under witness. Shut your mouth, Marshal Fenner snarled, blade lifting, but he didn't move. The chapel's pressure held all of them in a cage of consequence. Lady Sivra stood like a statue carved from winter, eyes fixed on Mavren with hatred so controlled it could have been law itself. Olland clutched his ledger to his chest, shaking, his earlier courage still trembling in him like a struck bell. Serric looked up. His eyes were no longer only furious. They were clear. Mavren, Serric said, voice low enough to vibrate in stone. You invoked crisis statute. Mavren's smile twitched. I did, he said smoothly. And I will finish. Serric's claws tightened around Ada's cloak, careful not to hurt her. Then you will be held to it, he said. Mavren's brows rose slightly. Held, he murmured. By whom? You. By the statute, Serric said. The chapel hummed, as if leaning closer. Olland sucked in a breath like someone about to jump into deep water. Your Majesty, he whispered, and his voice shook, but he spoke. The crisis statute, it has a clause. Mavren's gaze snapped to him, sharp. Be silent, he said softly. Olland flinched, then swallowed hard. No, he said, and the moment the word left him, his eyes widened with fear. He hurried, breathless, correcting the shape of his speech the way Lady Sivra had trained Ada to do. I will speak record, he forced out, voice trembling. Not vow. Lady Sivra's chin lifted a fraction, approval like a hidden blade. Olland opened his ledger with shaking hands. Frost-thin pages shimmered. He read, haltingly at first, then faster as the words steadied him. Crisis statute of the Islith Crown, he said, permits administrative efficient authority only insofar as it serves continuity of crown and realm, and forbids personal claim under coercive intent. Any officiant invoking it for personal accession is declared misaligned, and the witness is obligated to strip his word. Silence fell so hard Ada could have sworn the chapel's candles stopped flickering. Mavren's smile bared teeth. Convenient, he murmured. Words can be interpreted. They can, Lady Sivra said, voice cutting. Which is why we have witness. Mavren's gaze slid to the altar. The altar is witness, he said, and lifted his bleeding hand again. And it recognizes me. Serric's voice went colder. It recognizes blood, he said. And it recognizes lies if they're fed carefully enough. Mavren's eyes gleamed. Then feed it better, he said softly. You couldn't. That's why you're a beast. Serric's jaw tightened, then loosened, deliberately. He looked down at Ada in his arms, at the pale stillness of her face, at the frost creeping at the corners of her lashes. Then Serric did something the court had not seen in years. He lowered himself to his knees on the chapel stones, careful, controlled, and set Ada down gently against his thigh so she would not slump. He kept one hand braced behind her shoulders to hold her upright, and he did not let go. He faced the altar without touching it. And he spoke, not a promise, not a vow, not a refusal. A statement of truth, carved slow. I am Serric Vaelthorn, he said. I am the crowned king this realm remembers, even under curse. I did not consent to the theft of my sovereignty. I did not consent to the freeze. I did not consent to a blood tithe bound to human villages. Mavrin's eyes narrowed at the last line. Serric continued, voice steady despite the beast rasp in it. The queen is Ada Wrenfall, he said, and Ada's name in his mouth sounded like a hand placed gently on a bruise. She did not consent to the crown bonds waking. She did not consent to coercion. She is under winter sleep because you attempted to break her into proof. The chapel hummed, tense, as if the stones themselves strained to decide what to hold. Mavrin's voice cut in, sharp now. You can say anything, he snapped. Words are cheap. Serric's gaze lifted to him. Then let them cost, he said softly. Mavrin's mouth tightened. What? Serric looked to Ollind. Read the clause again, he said. Ollind's hands shook, but he obeyed. He read the line about misalignment, stripping word, obligation of witness. As Ollind spoke, Serric did not move. He held Ada's cold weight against him as if she were an anchor in a storm. When Ollind finished, Serric's voice dropped to something that made the chapel feel smaller. I invoke the crisis statute as it is, Serric said. Not as weapon. As structure. If Chancellor Mavrin Skell fed the chapel for personal accession, let the witness strip his word. If he did not, let the witness hold my accusation as false and punish me. Fenner swore under his breath. Lady Sivra's eyes flashed with alarm. Serric had stepped into a knife's edge without flinching. Mavrin laughed once, thin. You're trying to make yourself noble, he said, and his calm cracked into contempt. Very well. Witness is my specialty. He pressed his palm harder to the altar's groove. Blood ran freely now, too freely, as if the altar drank greedily. The light flared, blinding. Witness of the altar, Mavrin intoned, voice loud, record that Serric Vaelthorn is unstable, that Ada Wrenfall is. The chapel's hum surged, then stuttered. For a heartbeat, the light faltered like a candle pinched between fingers. Mavrin's voice wavered. His mouth opened again, but the sound that came out was not a word. It was a chime, harsh and broken, like a bell cracked down the middle. Mavrin's eyes widened in shock. He tried again. Breath. Tongue. Teeth-shaping syllables. Only chime. The altar's glow sharpened into something cruelly precise, and the pressure in the room shifted with a sudden, unmistakable certainty. Stripped. The witness had taken his word. Mavrin's hands flew to his throat as if to drag language back out of it. He staggered, face contorting with rage and disbelief. Lady Sivra let out a slow, icy breath. The statute holds, she said softly. Fenner's blade lifted higher. Finally, he growled. Mavrin's eyes snapped to Serric, frantic now. He could not speak, but he could still act. He shoved away from the altar, smearing blood across the stone, and darted toward Ada with sudden violence. His hands reached for her. If he could not bind with word, he could still take her as leverage. Serric moved. Not with a strike. With a shield. He surged forward, placing himself between Mavrin and Ada, and the chapel did not stop him. The altar's light flared as Serric crossed its invisible line, not punishing, but recognizing weight it had denied him before. Mavrin slammed into Serric's chest and bounced as if he'd hit a wall. Serric's claws closed around Mavrin's wrists, not crushing, not tearing, only holding. Mavrin struggled, eyes wild, mouth working soundlessly, spit flecking his lips as broken chimes rattled out of him. He looked, in that moment, less like an elegant chancellor and more like a man revealed as what he had always been, hungry. Serric's voice was low, shaking with restraint. You don't touch her, he said. Mavrin writhed, trying to wrench free. Serric tightened his grip. The chapel hummed, watching. The witness had stripped word. Now it waited to see what the realm would do with a voiceless offender. Lady Sivra stepped forward, hands folded, expression carved. Chancellor Mavrin Skell, she said, and the formality of naming him felt like driving a nail into a board. You are misaligned under statute. You are stripped of efficient authority. Your access to registry writ and altar witness is revoked. Mavrin choked out broken chimes, rage burning in his eyes. Ollind's hands trembled as he wrote, face pale but resolute. Recorded, he whispered, ink frost staining his fingers. Fenner moved in, blade still drawn but lowered. He placed iron cuffs, cold, rune-etched, around Mavren's wrists. Mavren jerked and fought, but the cuffs sank into place like a lock clicking shut. The chapel's pressure eased slightly, as if satisfied a structure had been completed. Serric turned his head, eyes scanning the doorway. The ward guards stood there still, glassy-eyed, caught between commands that had no word to drive them now. Lady Sivra's voice snapped, sharp as ice. "Marshal, sound the waking bell. Break winter sleep in the guards." Now that his word is stripped, his control should collapse. Fenner nodded once and barked an order. A guard at the corridor lifted a small metal disc, an ice-glass bell, and struck it with a pin. The tone rang clear, bright, and wrong in the chapel's hush. The glassy eyes of the sleepwalkers blinked. Focus returned in painful flickers. Confusion creased their faces. One stumbled, hand going to his own throat as if waking from a bad dream. They looked at Mavren, bound, silent, and recoiled as if seeing him properly for the first time. Serric didn't look back. He knelt again beside Ada. Her lashes were still rimed. Her lips had gone pale blue. Winter sleep held her like a heavy blanket, and Serric could feel, through the bond, the thinness of the ember inside her, alive, but hidden deep. Nessa had said warmth was the kind cost, but too much warmth drained would make you stop feeling your own hands. Ada had already paid twice. Serric's throat tightened. He had to bring her back without costing her whatever was left of herself. Lady Sivra stepped closer, her severity cracking just enough to show urgency. "The altar will try to complete what was started," she said. "Now that Mavren's word is stripped, it may settle. But the Queen's winter sleep." "I know," Serric said hoarsely. Ollind swallowed. "Your Majesty," he whispered, eyes wide, "there is a reversal clause. Old, rarely used. If a sovereign offers something of himself to counter a coerced rite." Lady Sivra's gaze snapped to him. "What does it cost?" Ollind's voice shook. "Name weight," he said. "Or memory. Or claim." Serric's claws flexed. Claim. Sovereignty. The very thing Mavren had stolen and Serric had been clawing back toward. Serric looked down at Ada. Her face was slack with sleep that wasn't rest. He saw, as if in the hearth's shadow, the outline of what she could become, a queen forged by accident and then broken by others' choices. He refused. Serric lifted his head and looked at the altar. He did not touch it. He spoke carefully, shaping each word like a stone laid in a river. "I will pay," he said. Lady Sivra inhaled sharply. "Your Majesty." Serric did not look away from Ada. "Not for my crown," he said softly. "For her." The chapel hummed again, intent. Serric's voice steadied. "I am Serric Vaelthorn," he said, and the name carried weight through stone. "I claim no right to Ada Wrenfall's will. I claim no right to her warmth. I claim no right to her memory." The bond in the air tightened, attentive. Serric continued, slower. "If the crown bond remains, let it remain by her choice, not coercion. If the bond cannot remain without harming her, let it loosen." Lady Sivra's eyes flashed with alarm. "Loosen it and you may remain cursed," she warned. Serric's gaze dropped to Ada again. "Then I remain cursed," he said, and there was no drama in it, only truth. The altar's light shivered. For a heartbeat, the silver groove blazed, then softened, as if it had been waiting not for blood, but for alignment. Ollind's hands trembled so hard he nearly dropped his ledger. "It's accepting," he whispered. Serric leaned closer to Ada. He hovered his hand over her chest, not touching, as if touch could bind. He closed his eyes and reached inward to the bond thread he'd felt so sharply since Ada arrived. He found it, a braided cord taut between them. He didn't yank it. He didn't tighten it. He loosened his grip on it from his side, letting his claim slacken like a fist opening. The cost hit immediately. Not warmth. Not blood. Something stranger, like a door in Serric's mind unlatching. A memory tried to slide away, a sunlit courtyard long ago, laughter like bells, the scent of thawing flowers, things Ada had never seen here. Serric's breath caught. His eyes flew open, bright with pain. "Name weight," Ollind had said. "Claim. Memory." Serric let the memory go. He did not fight it. He chose the price. The chapel's hum deepened into a steady tone. Ada's bond ember flared, small, then brighter. A faint color returned to her lips. Her lashes shivered. Ada's breath drew in, sudden and ragged, like someone surfacing from deep water. Her eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, she looked around in bewildered terror, the altar, the candles, the silent bound chancellor, the court faces tense with witness. Then her gaze found Serric. She blinked once, slowly, and a sound left her, not a sob, not a word, just a breath that shook like relief and grief tangled together. Serric's shoulders sagged with such force it was almost collapse. He braced himself on one hand, breathing hard, eyes fixed on her as if afraid she might vanish again. Ada's voice came out rough. "You, let go," she whispered. Serric swallowed. "Yes," he rasped. Ada's throat tightened, and her hand, still trembling, lifted toward him. She stopped just short of touching his cheek, remembering the chapel's listening. Serric's gaze flicked to her hand and softened, almost unbearably. He didn't move to close the distance. He waited. Choice. Ada drew a breath and lowered her hand to the stone instead, grounding herself. "Thank you," she whispered, and the thanks felt clean, without hook. Lady Sivra exhaled, sharp with relief she tried to hide. "The Queen is awake," she said briskly, as if naming it would make it steadier. "Marshal, remove Mavrin from the chapel. Now." The longer he remains near witness, the more he may try to twist it with gesture. Fenner hauled Mavrin up. Mavrin staggered, bound and voiceless, his eyes burning with hatred. He tried to speak, and only cracked chimes tumbled out. He looked, for the first time, powerless. As Fenner dragged him toward the doorway, Mavrin turned his head and fixed Serric with a stare that was all promise and no vow, threat without language. Serric's eyes went cold. "Write it down," he murmured to Ollind. Ollind nodded, swallowing hard. "Already," he whispered, pen scratching. When the chapel door closed and Mavrin's presence was pulled away like a draft sealed out, the pressure in the room eased. The candles steadied. The altar's glow dimmed to a quiet, watchful pulse awake, but no longer raging. Ada pushed herself upright, wincing. Her limbs were stiff. The cold still clung to her bones, but it no longer felt like it owned her. She looked at Serric. "What did it cost you?" she asked, voice thin. Serric's gaze dipped away. "Something I don't fully know yet," he said. Then, after a beat, he forced himself to meet her eyes again. "But I chose it." Ada's throat tightened. "You don't get to bleed for me forever," she whispered. Serric's voice was quiet. "I won't," he said, and the words were careful, promise-shaped, but not a vow. "Not unless you ask." Ada stared at him, and for the first time since the storm, the pull in her chest did not feel like a hook. It felt like a thread held loosely between two hands, present, real, but not tightened into a knot. They left the chapel slowly, surrounded by guard and witness, as if walking out of a trial. In the hall of registry, Lady Sivra moved like someone finally allowed to do the work she'd been sharpening herself for. She ordered the statute shelves sealed with 3 locks and 3 witnesses. She ordered access ledgers rewritten under new seals. She ordered the closed-eye efficient emblem removed from Mavrin's authority and placed under custody. Ollind wrote until his fingers cramped, his ink frost staining his skin deep blue. Each record he made was a nail hammered into a coffin lid. "This will hold?" Ada asked softly, watching him. Ollind's voice shook, but it carried a new steadiness too. "Yes," he said. "Because it's recorded under witness without coercion. And because he can't speak to alter it." Ada exhaled shakily. "And the curse?" Serric's jaw tightened. "The anchor has been named," he said. "And its maintainer is bound." Lady Sivra's eyes narrowed. "The realm will still need Thor," she said. "Winter held for years doesn't melt in a night." "No," Serric agreed. "But it can begin." They found Nessa in the hearthwing, slumped against a corridor wall as if she'd sat down and fallen asleep mid-breath. Her skin was cold, her lashes frosted. A winter sleep mark, faintly glowing seamwork, ran along the cuff of her sleeve where the guard had grabbed her. Ada's stomach clenched. She knelt beside her without thinking. Serric's hand hovered over Ada's shoulder, protective, then withdrew. He let her choose again. Ada looked up at Lady Sivra. How do we wake her? Nessa's heat stitches had been warmth with a pattern. Ada's mind flickered back to the way she'd felt the keep's seams, the bond's braid. Warmth and structure. Lady Sivra's gaze softened by a fraction. We do it the right way, she said. With consent and witness. Ollind set his ledger down on a nearby table, eyes wide. A waking bell, he whispered. And a name spoken as truth. Ada swallowed and leaned close to Nessa. Nessa Briarweft, she said softly, not a command, not a vow, just calling someone back the way you call them from a deep sleep. It's Ada. You're safe. Wake up. Fenna struck the ice-glass bell again. The seamwork along Nessa's sleeve flickered. Her lashes trembled. She sucked in a breath with a startled gasp and jerked upright, eyes wild for half a heartbeat, then she saw Ada and blinked hard. Oh, Nessa croaked. That was rude. Ada let out a shaky laugh that was half sob. I'm sorry, she breathed. Nessa's gaze slid past Ada and landed on Serric. Something softened. Did you get him? She asked hoarsely. Serric nodded once. Yes, he said. Nessa exhaled and sagged, then looked back at Ada with fierce intensity. You, she demanded. Ada pressed a hand to her chest. The bond ember pulsed, steady and warm. Yes, she said. I think so. Nessa nodded as if that mattered more than crowns. Good, she rasped. We'll keep it that way. By late morning, the keep felt different. Not warmer, exactly, not yet, but less hostile. The blue flames in the sconces no longer guttered like nervous eyes. The corridors held their shapes instead of shifting like lies. Serric stood in the grand hall with Ada, Lady Sivra, Fenna, Ollind, and a ring of subdued court members who had been summoned under explicit instruction. No gifts, no hooks, no private counsel. Mavrin, bound and voiceless, stood guarded at the far end, pale with contained rage. Lady Sivra stepped forward and spoke to the court, her voice crisp enough to cut through shock. The Chancellor is stripped under crisis statute, she said. His word is stripped under witness. His actions are recorded. The registry is sealed. Murmurs rippled through the nobles like wind through reeds. Some looked relieved. Some looked terrified. Some looked like they were recalculating where safety lived now that the person who'd seemed unmovable was suddenly bound. Serric lifted one hand, and the murmurs died. He looked at Ada. Not as a symbol. As a person. Ada's throat tightened. The court watched, hungry for narrative. Ada refused to become it. Serric turned back to the room. The freeze will be undone, he said. Not at once. Not without care. We will restore the wards without binding human villages to blood tithe. A sharp stir ran through the court at the word blood tithe, some flinched as if they'd hoped it would never be said aloud. Serric continued, voice steady. We will rebuild law that cannot be twisted by one hand in the dark. We will teach court speech as protection, not as weapon. His gaze slid briefly to Ada, then back. And the Queen, he said, will not be hidden. Ada felt heat rise to her cheeks, but her spine stayed straight. She stepped forward, just one pace, enough to be seen as herself. My name is Ada Wrenfall, she said clearly. I was pulled into this by accident. I'm still here because I chose not to be broken into proof. The hall's attention pressed in, dangerous, eager. Ada breathed slowly and kept going. I will learn your rules, she said. But you will not use them to cage me. If you want a queen, you will have a queen who speaks plainly when it matters and pauses when it doesn't. Lady Sivra's mouth tightened in something that might have been approval. Fenna's gaze warmed briefly, fierce and protective. Nessa's grin flashed from the edge of the crowd. Ollind looked like he might cry again, relieved. Even the keep seemed to hush, listening, and not once did Ada feel it tightening around her words like a trap. Because she was speaking truth, not bargaining. When it was done, Serric escorted Ada, not carried, not guided like a fragile thing, out into the inner courtyard. The fountain was still frozen, but the ice no longer felt like it was biting. In the pale light of day, Ada saw something new, tiny fractures in the ice spire, hairline cracks spreading like veins. Thor. Ada exhaled, breath fogging. So it begins, she murmured. Serric stood beside her, close enough that his warmth brushed her sleeve, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. Ada looked at him. You said you would choose my freedom over your restoration, she said softly. Serric's jaw tightened. I meant it, he said. Ada swallowed. And you loosened your claim, she said. You didn't hold the bond like a chain. Serric's eyes held hers. No, he said. I won't. Ada's chest ached with something that was not fear this time. She took a slow breath. Then I want to ask you something, she said, and her voice trembled, not with cold, with weight. Not as a vow. Not as a duty. Serric's gaze sharpened, careful. Ask. Ada held his eyes. When this is stable, when the realm is less raw, will you let me choose the bond on purpose? Serric's breath left him in a soft, broken sound. His beast face made emotion complicated, but his eyes were nakedly human. Yes, he said. If you choose it. Ada swallowed hard. And if I don't? Serric's throat bobbed. Then I will still protect you, he said quietly. And I will still respect you. Even if it costs me everything I wanted. Ada's eyes burned. She nodded once, unable to trust her voice for a moment. A gust moved through the courtyard, not the storm's violence, but a gentler wind. Snow shifted in a soft sigh. Ada's bond pulsed, steady, warm. She thought of her father again, and the dread rose, but it was no longer helpless dread. It was a problem to solve. I need to send word to my father, she said. Again. Not just don't come. I need him to know it wasn't a lie. Serric nodded. We will, he said. Today. In the message-well chamber, the brazier lit with pale flame. Ada's hands trembled, but not as badly. Nessa stood nearby with heat stitches ready. Lady Sivra waited as witness. Ollind held a ledger to record without hooks. Fenna guarded the door. Serric knelt by the brazier and looked up at Ada. Only truth, he murmured. Ada closed her eyes and pictured her father's hearth, pictured him sitting with hands clasped too tightly, eyes fixed on the door like he could will her through it. Wylam, Ada said softly. The smoke shivered, eager. Father, Ada said, voice steady, it was a lie that I was dead. Don't go to the Evergloam. Don't listen to anyone who uses my name like a tool. I'm alive. I'm far, but I'm myself. I will send word again. Please wait for me. Warmth drained from Ada's ribs less than before, as if the bond had learned to carry her voice without taking so much. Ada swallowed. I love you, she added, and this time the words didn't feel like a weakness. They felt like a root. The smoke vanished into the glass. Ada opened her eyes and let out a long breath. That's all I can do, she whispered. Serric's gaze held hers. It's not all, he said softly. It's enough. That evening, the keep's fires burned a little brighter. The halls felt less like a throat and more like a house that had been abandoned too long and was finally remembering how to be lived in. Mavrin was secured in a warded chamber, his voice still stripped, his hands bound, his access cut. The court moved cautiously around the new reality, like deer stepping around a fallen tree. Ada sat with Nessa in the hearthwing, letting her adjust the seams of her sleeves with hands that never stopped moving. You saved yourself, Nessa muttered, stabbing a pin through cloth with decisive force. That's the thing people keep missing. Everyone's so busy staring at Serric's curse and Mavrin's schemes they forget you didn't just get dragged along. Ada's throat tightened. I almost broke, she whispered. Nessa's pin paused. She looked up, eyes sharp. Almost isn't broke, she said. And next time, you'll have better stitches. Ada let out a small laugh, then sobered. Do you think there will be a next time? Nessa's mouth twisted. It's a court, she said. Of course. Ada nodded slowly, then looked toward the corridor where Serric stood speaking quietly with Lady Sivra and Ollind. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with years. Ada rose and walked to him. Lady Sivra stopped speaking as Ada approached, but she didn't step away, she simply waited, witness without intrusion. Ada stood beside Serric, close enough to feel his warmth. You paid something, she said softly. Serric's gaze flicked to hers. Yes. Ada swallowed. I won't let that be the only story, she said. Not yours. Not mine. Not the realm's. Serric's eyes softened, and for the first time he let himself do what he'd been holding back since the storm. He bowed his head slightly to her. Not as a king to a symbol. As a man acknowledging a woman who had become his equal by choice. Ada's chest tightened. She lifted her hand and, this time, touched his forearm, gentle, deliberate, not in the chapel's trap but in the hearthwing's living warmth. Serric went still, breath catching, then eased into it as if he'd been waiting for permission to exist near her. Ada's voice was quiet. We'll do this carefully, she said. With rules that protect, not rules that bite. Serric's voice was rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. Yes, he said. Carefully. Outside, in the courtyard, the frozen fountain cracked again, soft, like ice shifting under sun. And somewhere beyond the Evergloam's edge, in a small village kitchen, a tired woodcutter lifted his head sharply as if he'd heard his daughter's voice on the wind, and for the first time in days, he believed he could wait.